Hello there and welcome to History for Lunatics. I'm so glad you're here tonight. Find somewhere comfortable if you can. Maybe you're in bed already. Maybe you're sitting on the couch with the lights low. Maybe you're listening with one ear while the rest of the house settles down around you. Wherever you are, I want you to imagine something very simple. A door. Not a grand door. Not the kind that belongs to a mansion or a government building or a famous hotel lobby. Just an ordinary door on an ordinary American street in the 1920s. It might be beside a barber shop. It might be behind a restaurant kitchen. It might be at the bottom of a narrow staircase under a sign that says nothing interesting at all. From the outside, it looks like the kind of door you could walk past 100 times and never think about again. But on the other side of it, there is music. There is cigarette smoke rising toward the ceiling. There are women in short beaded dresses and men with their collars loosened. There is a bartender pouring something he is absolutely not supposed to be pouring. There is a piano, maybe a trumpet, maybe a singer standing in the corner trying to be heard over the laughter. And somewhere near that door there is a man watching every face that enters, because in this room, one wrong stranger could ruin the entire night. Tonight, we're going into a speakeasy during Prohibition. Not the glamorous version, or at least not only the glamorous version. Not just the movie image of jazz, pearls, gangsters and cocktails, with names that sound better than they probably tasted. We're going into the actual room, the working room, the hidden room, the room America created when it tried to make alcohol disappear, and discovered instead that human beings are very good at finding doors. We are going to look at what it felt like to enter one of these places, what people drank there, who served it, who protected it, who profited from it, and why the whole thing was much more complicated than a simple story of people breaking a law for fun. Because a speakeasy was not just a bar with the lights turned down. It was a pressure point in American life. It was where law, money, music, class, gender, crime, pleasure, fear, and ordinary human stubbornness all crowded into the same smoky room and tried not to make eye contact with the police. Before we step inside, I want to ask you something. What time is it where you are right now? Is it late enough that the streets outside your window are quiet? Are you listening from a city where there are still bars open somewhere? Bright little rooms where people are ordering drinks without thinking twice about it? Or are you somewhere peaceful, with no noise except the soft hum of the room around you? If you want to, tell me where you are listening from tonight. I always like imagining the different places these stories travel to. Bedrooms and kitchens and parked cars and night shifts and little corners of the world I would never otherwise know about. And if this kind of storytelling helps you settle in, if you like slow history told through ordinary people and ordinary places, it would mean a great deal if you subscribed and gave the video a like. You do not have to do it this second. Do it when the story earns it. When some small detail makes the past feel close enough to touch. Now, let us go back to an American city in the middle of the 1920s. The exact city almost does not matter at first. It could be New York, Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, New Orleans, San Francisco, or any one of the smaller cities where people knew the law and also knew where to get a drink after dinner. The sidewalks are busy, cars rattle over the street. The older horse-drawn wagons have not entirely disappeared yet, so the street has that strange in-between sound of the early motor age, engines coughing, hooves striking pavement, people shouting over both. Electric signs glow over theatres and drugstores. Men sell newspapers from corners, and those newspapers are full of arguments about morality, crime, politics, corruption, and the strange national experiment everyone is living through whether they voted for it or not. Somewhere above all of this, in the law of the United States itself, the 18th Amendment has declared that intoxicating liquors are not to be manufactured, sold, or transported for beverage purposes. The Volstead Act has given that amendment teeth. On paper, the matter is settled. America has chosen sobriety. But paper is not a street. Paper is not a Saturday night. Paper is not a man who has just worked 10 hours and wants a glass of beer. Paper is not a woman who has spent the day in an office or a department store or at home with children and wants music and company, and the feeling of being alive in a room that is not asking her to be respectable every single second. Paper is not a bartender who used to make an honest living legally, and now knows the same customers still want the same thing, only they are willing to pay more for it. This is the first thing to understand about Prohibition. It did not arrive in a country that had no relationship with alcohol. It arrived in a country built around it in thousands of ordinary ways. Saloons had been meeting places, political offices, hiring halls, neighbourhood clubs, and social shelters for working men. Beer and whiskey were not rare luxuries. They were everyday parts of American life, loved by some, abused by many, feared by reformers, and woven deeply into the habits of the country. So when the law changed, habits did not simply vanish. They went indoors. They went downstairs. They went behind curtains. They learned passwords. And that is how you find yourself walking down a city street toward a place that does not officially exist. You may have heard about it from a friend because that is how these places often survived. Not by advertising, at least not openly, but through whispers and introductions and the delicate social mathematics of knowing someone who knew someone. The word speakeasy itself had been around before national prohibition, used for illicit drinking places where customers were told to speak easy, to keep their voices low, to avoid drawing attention. By the 1920s, the word felt almost made for the age. It sounded secretive without sounding too serious. It turned a criminal act into a social adventure. It gave the whole thing a little wink. The entrance might be almost comically plain. That is part of the point. Perhaps it is through a restaurant where the front room serves coffee and sandwiches, and the back room serves rye whiskey that came from no legal wholesaler anyone wants to name. Perhaps it is through a soda shop where a man at the counter can make you a perfectly innocent ice cream drink if you are a stranger, and something much stronger if you are not. Perhaps it is through a door beside a laundry, down a staircase that smells faintly of damp stone and cigar smoke. In some cities, speakeasies operated behind peepholes and sliding panels. In others, the protection was less theatrical. The owner paid the right policeman, the right ward boss, the right inspector, and the door stayed open because everyone who mattered had already agreed not to see it. This is one of those details that changes the story if you sit with it for a moment. Prohibition did not simply create hidden drinking places, it created entire systems of selective blindness. A speakeasy could not function for long on secrecy alone. Too many people had to know. The customers knew, the taxi drivers knew, the musicians knew, the doorman knew, the police often knew, local politicians often knew, federal agents might know, and still not have enough manpower, evidence, or honest cooperation to do anything about it. The speakeasy survived not because it was invisible, but because visibility had become negotiable. That is a very strange thing to say about a law written into the Constitution, but it is true. The law was enormous. The enforcement of it was uneven, underfunded, and often compromised before the night even began. Imagine now that you're approaching that door. You're not dressed for bed, obviously. You're dressed for the night. And in the 1920s, that means something different depending on who you are. If you are a man with money, maybe you're in a dark suit, polished shoes, hair slicked neatly back. If you are a working man, maybe your collar is not perfect, maybe your coat is plain, but you have enough cash in your pocket for a drink that costs more than it used to. If you are a woman, your presence in this place already says something. Before Prohibition, the old saloon was overwhelmingly a male world. Respectable women were not usually expected to drink publicly in such places. But speakeasies changed that. Not everywhere, not for everyone, and not as completely as the movies suggest, but enough that people noticed. Women came into these rooms, they drank cocktails, they danced, they smoked, they listened to jazz, they occupied public nightlife in ways that made older moralists deeply uncomfortable. The law meant to discipline the country had helped create spaces where the old rules of respectability loosened, and that was one of the great unintended consequences of the entire era. At the door, there may be a password, there may be a knock, there may simply be a look from the man watching the entrance, a quick assessment of your clothes, your face, your confidence, your danger. Are you police? Are you a federal agent? Are you trouble? Are you drunk already? Are you someone who might start a fight or talk too loudly outside afterward? Speakeasies needed customers, but they also needed control. A bad customer could bring attention. A frightened customer could give names. A careless customer could walk out, laugh too loudly, and lead the wrong person straight back to the entrance. So the first ritual of the speakeasy was not drinking. It was being allowed in. And then the door opens. The first thing that hits you is not the alcohol. It is the air. Warm, crowded, used air. The smell of tobacco smoke, perfume, damp wool coats, hair tonic, spilled liquor, and bodies packed too close together. If there is a kitchen nearby, maybe fried food rides underneath it all, onions or meat or coffee. If the place is cheap, the smell may be rougher, heavier, with sour beer and cheap gin in the floorboards. If the place is expensive, the smoke is still there, but the room works harder to hide everything else. The lighting is low because low lighting is flattering, but also because low lighting helps everyone pretend. Lamps on tables, a glow behind the bar, maybe candles, maybe electric fixtures shaded so faces look softer and corners remain useful. This is not the bright public world of daylight America. This is a room designed to make people feel protected from the consequences of their own choices. The music matters. It matters more than people sometimes realize. The 1920s were not only the age of Prohibition, they were also the jazz age, and speakeasies gave jazz musicians, singers, dancers and nightclub performers a place to work, especially in cities where nightlife kept pushing against the law. In a good speakeasy, the music could be the reason people came as much as the liquor. A trumpet could cut through the room, a pianist could hold the whole crowd together, a singer could make a song feel private even while everyone was listening. In Harlem, places like the Cotton Club became famous, though they also reflected the racial inequalities of the time in brutally clear ways, with black performers on stage and often white audiences in the best seats. In other clubs, black audiences, immigrant communities, working people, and neighbourhood regulars built their own nightlife away from the polished fantasy sold uptown. The speakeasy was never one single kind of place. It could be elegant, it could be filthy, it could be dangerous, it could be joyous, it could be all of those things before midnight. Here is the part that always surprises me when I think about it. For many people inside that room, the thrill was not simply the drink. It was the shared knowledge that everyone was doing something forbidden together. That changes the atmosphere of a room. It creates a strange intimacy among strangers. The man at the next table might be a banker, a clerk, a bootlegger, a judge, a reporter, or a police officer off duty. The woman laughing near the bar might be a secretary, a showgirl, a married woman out with friends, a college student testing the edges of the new decade, or someone whose name no one in the room actually knows. Everyone is participating in the same small conspiracy. Everyone knows the law is outside. Everyone knows the glass in front of them is evidence. That is not a normal way to have a drink. It turns the simplest gesture, lifting a glass to your mouth, into a tiny act of defiance. But we should be careful not to make that defiance too noble. A speakeasy was not a freedom movement with better music. It was a business, and often a very profitable one. The liquor had to come from somewhere. Some came from Canada, some came by sea, some was stolen from legal industrial or medicinal supplies. Some was made in hidden stills by people who knew what they were doing. Some was made by people who absolutely did not. The romantic phrase bathtub gin hides an unpleasant reality. Much of what people drank during Prohibition was harsh, poorly made, badly cut, and sometimes dangerous. Cocktails became popular in part because fruit juice, sugar, bitters, and other flavourings could disguise liquor that no sensible person would have praised on its own. A drink could look festive, sound modern, and still be built around spirits that would have made a pre-Prohibition bartender wince. That is one of the small jokes of the period, though not always a harmless one. America tried to stop people from drinking and in many cases made them drink worse alcohol at higher prices in more dangerous rooms. Still, inside the speakeasy it could feel wonderful. That is part of the honesty this story requires. We cannot understand why these places mattered if we only describe them as criminal dens or moral failures. People went because they were fun. They went because the music was alive. They went because the decade felt fast and modern and unstable, and the speakeasy matched that feeling perfectly. The First World War was over, but its shadow had not vanished. Cities were growing. Young people were pushing against older rules. Women had gained the right to vote in 1920. The same year national prohibition truly took hold, and the country was still arguing over what modern womanhood was supposed to look like. Cars made movement easier. Radios carried songs and voices into homes. Movies taught people new gestures, new fashions, new desires. The speakeasy sat inside all of that change like a small bright engine. It was illegal, yes, but it also felt current. To be there was to feel that you were inside the age, not watching it pass from the porch. Now picture yourself at a table. The surface may be sticky, it may be polished, it may be covered with a cloth if the owner is trying to make the place seem respectable. A waiter comes by quickly because speed matters when a room is crowded and money is moving. Maybe there is no printed menu for obvious reasons. Maybe there is, but it is written in code or disguised behind harmless words. You order something, a gin fizz, a whiskey sour, a sidecar, a glass of beer if the place has it. Beer was harder to conceal and transport than spirits, which is one reason hard liquor became so central during Prohibition. A bottle of whiskey carried more intoxication in less space than a barrel of beer. That simple fact shaped what people drank. Laws often change behaviour in practical ways that no moral crusader puts on a poster. The glass arrives, and here is a question worth staying with. What does it feel like to drink something because the government says you may not have it? Does it taste better? Does it taste sharper? Does it make you more aware of your own mouth, your own hand, the room around you? Maybe it does at first. Maybe the first sip carries a little theatre with it. But after a while, human beings have a way of turning even illegal things into routine. The third time you visit a speakeasy, you know where to hang your coat. The fifth time, the waiter recognises you. The 10th time, the danger becomes part of the furniture. That is when the room is most interesting to me. Not when it is shocking, but when it becomes normal. Because that is what happened across the country. Millions of people did not spend 13 years gasping at the scandal of it all. They adapted. They learned which places were safe, which ones were expensive, which ones watered the drinks, which ones might be raided, which policemen could be bought, which nights had the best music. The illegal became social, the hidden became familiar. And outside, the official story continued. Temperance organisations argued that prohibition would protect families, reduce poverty, improve health, and weaken the saloon culture that had done real damage in many communities. It is important to say that they were not inventing every concern out of thin air. Alcohol abuse had harmed families. Saloons had trapped wages. Domestic violence, workplace accidents, political corruption, and public drunkenness were not imaginary problems. Many Americans supported prohibition because they had seen alcohol destroy households and wanted a better country. That part of the story deserves to be taken seriously. But history is rarely kind to simple solutions. Once the amendment took effect, the country discovered that banning the legal sale of alcohol did not eliminate the demand for it. It transferred that demand into illegal markets, and those illegal markets rewarded people willing to break laws at scale. So while a couple laughs in a corner booth and a band plays louder, somewhere behind the pleasure sits a chain of risk. The owner pays suppliers, the suppliers pay drivers, drivers pay lookouts Lookouts pay policemen, or avoid them, or get caught by them. A federal agent may be building a case, a rival gang may want control of the neighbourhood, a batch of liquor may be contaminated, a customer may say the wrong thing. The room feels sealed off from the world, but it is connected to everything. Every bottle on the shelf has a story of movement behind it. Every dollar placed on the table travels outward into a larger economy of bribery, smuggling, violence, and survival. That is why the speakeasy is such a perfect window into Prohibition. It holds the contradiction in one room. It is funny and dangerous. It is stylish and shabby. It is full of freedom and full of exploitation. It gives women new space in public nightlife while operating within a world still controlled mostly by men with money, muscle, or political connections. It offers music and pleasure while helping build criminal fortunes. It mocks the law while depending on the law to make its product valuable. A legal drink is just a drink. An illegal drink can become an industry. The night is still young. The doorman is still watching. The bartender is moving quickly now because the crowd has thickened and the air has turned warmer. Someone near the piano is laughing too loudly. A woman at a table is touching up her lipstick in a small mirror. A man in the corner keeps glancing toward the entrance, not because he is afraid exactly, but because caution has become part of the evening. Outside, America is dry by constitutional command. Inside, glasses are filling one after another. And to understand how a country reached this strange arrangement, how a private appetite became a public battle, and then an underground business, we have to step back from the door for a moment and look at the law that made that door necessary in the first place. The strange thing about Prohibition is that it did not begin with a secret door. It did not begin with a jazz band or a hidden bottle or a policeman taking an envelope in an alley. It began in public, in daylight, with speeches and sermons and petitions and meetings held in church basements, town halls, schoolrooms and state legislatures. It began with people who believed, many of them sincerely, that alcohol was not simply a personal weakness, but a national wound. And if you had lived in the United States in the late 1800s or early 1900s, you would have seen enough to understand why they thought that. The old saloon was not just a place where a man bought a beer. In many working-class neighbourhoods, it was the centre of male social life. It was where wages were spent, where political favours were arranged, where jobs were promised, where immigrant men found companionship, where local party machines gathered votes, where a lonely labourer could find a warm room and a familiar face after a long day. But it was also where some men drank away rent money, where fights started, where families waited at home for wages that never arrived, where women and children bore the cost of a habit they had no power to control. So before Prohibition became a national joke, before it became a story of gangsters and cocktails and raids, it was a reform movement. It was a moral campaign. It was a promise made to families that if the country could only close the saloon, everything else might begin to heal. That is the first thing worth slowing down for. The people who pushed for Prohibition were not all fools and they were not all hypocrites. Some were rigid. Some were self-righteous. Some were deeply prejudiced against immigrants, Catholics, urban workers, and anyone whose habits did not look like rural Protestant respectability. That part of the story is real, but many of them had seen alcohol do genuine damage. Women in particular had reasons to support temperance that were rooted in daily life. In a period before most women could vote, before divorce was easy, before domestic violence was treated with anything like modern seriousness, and before married women had anything close to full financial independence, a husband's drinking could become a household disaster with no simple escape. If he drank his wages, everyone suffered. If he came home violent, everyone suffered. If he lost his job, everyone suffered. The temperance movement gave women a public language for a private fear. It gave them a way to say that the drinking habits of men were not just private choices, they were social problems. By the late 1800s, temperance had deep roots in American life. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, founded in 1874, became one of the largest women's organisations in the country. Its members did not only campaign against liquor, they pushed for education, labour reform, prison reform and women's suffrage, because they understood that alcohol was connected to larger questions of power inside the family and the state. Then there was the Anti-Saloon League, founded in 1893, which became one of the most effective pressure groups in American political history. The name tells you exactly what mattered to them. They did not call themselves the Anti-Drink League or the Anti-Whiskey League. They targeted the saloon because the saloon was visible, political, and hated by reformers in a way that a private glass of wine at a wealthy dinner table was not. The saloon stood for everything they wanted to break: machine politics, public drunkenness, immigrant neighbourhoods, male leisure, and the power of the brewing industry. The Anti-Saloon League understood politics with a cold precision that still feels modern. It did not need every voter to care about prohibition equally. It needed enough voters in enough districts to make politicians afraid. It endorsed candidates based on one question: would they support dry laws or not? A politician could be conservative or progressive, Democrat or Republican, charming or dull. If he backed prohibition, he could receive support. If he opposed it, the League would try to remove him. This was not a sentimental movement by the time it reached national power. It was organised, disciplined, and relentless. Its most famous strategist, Wayne Wheeler, mastered a style of pressure politics that made lawmakers feel watched from every direction. He knew how to count votes. He knew how to punish hesitation. He knew how to make a minority of intensely committed voters matter more than a majority of distracted ones. By the time national prohibition became possible, it had been prepared for years in state laws, county votes, church campaigns, and local elections that slowly dried out large parts of the country before the federal government ever acted. Then came the First World War, and the argument changed shape. War has a way of making old causes sound urgent. Grain was needed for food, reformers said, not for beer. National discipline mattered, efficiency mattered, sacrifice mattered. Breweries, many of them owned by German-American families, became politically vulnerable in a country at war with Germany. This was one of the uglier parts of the movement, because anti-alcohol politics mixed easily with anti-German suspicion. Beer, which had once been defended by many as a milder, more civilised alternative to whiskey, became tied in the public mind to foreign influence and disloyalty. The temperance cause was no longer only about saving families from drunkenness. It was about patriotism, wartime duty, and national purity. Those arguments moved through Congress at exactly the moment when the country was already willing to accept extraordinary federal power in the name of war. The result was the 18th Amendment. Congress proposed it in December 1917, and the states ratified it with remarkable speed. On January 16th, 1919, Nebraska became the state that gave the amendment the required approval, and 1 year later, national prohibition would take effect. The wording of the amendment is important because it reveals one of the strange legal facts behind the entire era. It did not ban drinking itself. It prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors for beverage purposes. That distinction sounds small, but it mattered. A person could drink liquor that had been legally acquired before Prohibition began. A person could possess certain private stocks. Alcohol could still exist for medicinal, sacramental, and industrial uses. The law did not say that every glass of liquor in every hand was illegal in itself. Instead, it attacked the commercial system that put liquor into those hands. It tried to stop the making, selling, and moving of alcohol. In ordinary life, of course, that meant if you wanted to drink after the legal supply ran out, someone had to break the law before the glass reached you. This is how a drink became a secret. Not all at once, not in the dramatic way a curtain drops in a theatre, but through the closing of ordinary legal paths. Before Prohibition, a man could walk into a saloon and buy beer. A woman in a wealthier home might be served wine at dinner. A hotel bar could sell whiskey openly. Breweries operated as businesses. Distilleries shipped their products through legal channels. Taxes were paid. Licenses were issued. The entire thing, for better or worse, stood in daylight. After Prohibition took effect on January 17, 1920, the same desire had to move through hidden channels. If someone wanted whiskey, that whiskey needed a hidden source. If someone wanted beer, someone needed to brew it outside the legal market or divert it from some permitted use. If a club wanted to serve cocktails, bottles had to arrive by truck, by boat, by bribery, by forgery, by theft, or by some combination of all of those. The law did not remove the drink, it removed the honest route. The Volstead Act, passed in 1919 over President Woodrow Wilson's veto, gave enforcement details to the amendment. It defined intoxicating liquor as anything above 1/2 of 1% alcohol by volume, which was a much stricter standard than some people had expected. There had been brewers who hoped beer and light wine might survive. They did not. Under Volstead, ordinary beer was gone from legal sale. Wine for the table was gone from legal sale. Whiskey, gin, rum, brandy, all gone from legal sale for beverage use. The law did allow certain exceptions, and those exceptions became doorways of their own. Doctors could prescribe medicinal alcohol. Religious congregations could use sacramental wine. Industrial alcohol could be manufactured for non-drinking purposes. Farmers could preserve fruit in ways that created legal ambiguities. Grape concentrates were sold with warnings that almost seemed to instruct buyers how not to accidentally let the juice ferment into wine. Everywhere the law drew a line, Americans studied the line closely. If you want to understand the daily absurdity of the era, think about the doctor's prescription pad. Whiskey and brandy had long been used in medicine, sometimes with real therapeutic intention, and often with a generous understanding of what counted as treatment. During Prohibition, medicinal liquor became one of the legal ways alcohol could still move. A patient might receive a prescription for whiskey for influenza, anxiety, digestion, weakness, or some other complaint broad enough to be useful. Pharmacies could dispense it under regulation. Not every prescription was fraudulent, but enough were convenient that the whole system became part of the country's quiet negotiation with the law. A respectable person who would never enter a basement speakeasy might still acquire a bottle through a physician. A minister could still obtain sacramental wine. A wealthy household with a stocked cellar could keep serving guests privately for a while, provided the liquor had been obtained before the law took effect. Prohibition was strict in theory, but in practice it did not touch every class of American the same way. That unevenness mattered. Wealth softened the law. A rich person could keep a private cellar, join an exclusive club, hire servants who knew where to obtain what was needed, or travel abroad and drink legally. A working person who wanted alcohol was more likely to depend on a neighbourhood bootlegger, a cheap speakeasy, homemade liquor, or a friend with a still. Rural Americans had their own arrangements. Some made moonshine in hidden places, continuing traditions that had existed long before Prohibition. Urban Americans had imported liquor, local rackets, and underground bars. Immigrant communities preserved drinking customs that dry reformers often treated with suspicion or contempt. The law claimed to apply nationally, but its burden fell differently depending on money, location, connections, and the willingness of local authorities to enforce it. This is one reason the speakeasy became such a powerful symbol. It exposed the gap between the law as written and the country as lived. On paper, America had made itself dry. In practice, entire cities remained damp enough to make the paper curl. New York alone was widely believed to have tens of thousands of illegal drinking places at various points during the 1920s, though exact numbers are difficult because the whole point was not to be counted. Some were tiny back rooms, some were elegant nightclubs, some were little more than apartments where liquor was sold by the glass, some were protected by organised crime, some by local politics, some by the simple fact that enforcement agents could not be everywhere. The federal government had taken on a task that required a level of policing the country had not truly prepared to provide. There were too few agents, too many miles of coastline, too many roads, too many cities, too many thirsty citizens, and too much money available to anyone willing to help the alcohol move. The money changed everything. Before Prohibition, liquor was profitable. During Prohibition, illegal liquor could be enormously profitable. The risk raised the price. A bottle that could no longer move legally became more valuable precisely because of the danger attached to it. Smugglers brought liquor across the Canadian border. Ships anchored beyond US territorial waters in what became known as Rum Row, waiting for smaller boats to run cargo to shore. Trucks carried hidden loads at night. Police were bribed to look away. Local officials were bribed to warn owners before raids. Judges, politicians and enforcement officers all faced temptations that the law itself had created. A constitutional amendment meant to purify American life ended up feeding corruption at nearly every level. This does not mean enforcement was imaginary. Federal agents did conduct raids. Stills were destroyed. Speakeasies were closed. Bootleggers were arrested. People went to prison. Newspapers reported dramatic seizures of liquor, smashed barrels, captured trucks, and agents posing as customers. There were honest officers who believed in the law and risked their safety to enforce it. There were also officers who enforced it selectively, hitting one establishment while protecting another. There were agents who could not be bought and agents who could. The ordinary drinker could never be completely sure which kind was about to walk through the door. That uncertainty became part of the speakeasy atmosphere. The room might be warm and lively, but the law was never entirely absent. It was always just outside, or possibly already inside, sitting at a table and pretending to be thirsty. The Dry movement had imagined a country transformed by the disappearance of alcohol. Many supporters expected crime to decline, families to stabilise, productivity to rise, and prisons to empty. Some early statistics were used to claim success, and in certain places alcohol consumption did drop, especially at first. But the longer Prohibition continued, the more visible its failures became. Drinking did not vanish, it changed form. Beer and wine, which are bulky and harder to transport secretly, gave way in many illegal markets to stronger spirits. The public saloon disappeared, but the private speakeasy multiplied. The bartender became a criminal tradesman. The brewer became a bootleg supplier. The customer became part of an illegal economy. Instead of teaching the country obedience, Prohibition taught millions of Americans how to live with a law they did not respect. That loss of respect may have been one of the deepest consequences. Americans have always had a complicated relationship with law, especially laws that seem to reach too far into private habit. Prohibition turned ordinary behaviour into a test of loyalty. A person who bought a drink was not robbing a bank. He was not harming anyone directly in that moment. He was doing something that had been legal for most of his life and was still socially accepted by many people around him. When a law criminalises something large numbers of people continue to see as normal, enforcement becomes more than a police problem. It becomes a legitimacy problem. The government can arrest some violators, but it cannot arrest a mood. And by the mid-1920s, the mood in many cities had shifted from moral determination to practical evasion. Still, it would be too simple to say Prohibition failed only because Americans liked drinking. It also struggled because the law carried contradictions from the beginning. It tried to regulate private appetite through public force. It depended on local cooperation in communities that often did not want to cooperate. It created financial incentives for criminals while underestimating the scale of the market they would serve. It allowed exceptions that invited abuse. It punished the visible poor more easily than the protected rich. It promised moral clarity and produced legal confusion. And through all of that, the ordinary drink itself changed meaning. A glass of whiskey was no longer just a glass of whiskey. It was a political argument, a social signal, a business opportunity, a police matter, and in some circles, almost a joke. Imagine being someone who had supported Prohibition with real hope. Perhaps you were a woman in a small town who had watched men stagger out of saloons on payday. Perhaps you had grown up with a father who drank too much and a mother who suffered for it. Perhaps your church taught that liquor was a tool of ruin, and you believed it because you had seen ruin with your own eyes. Then imagine reading the newspapers a few years later and seeing stories of fashionable young people drinking openly in hidden clubs, of gangsters growing rich, of officials taking bribes, of city people treating the law as a game. That anger was real too. The speakeasy was not charming to everyone. To dry Americans, it looked like national disobedience wearing a nice suit and dancing badly to jazz. To wet Americans, those who opposed Prohibition, the speakeasy looked like proof that the law was foolish. The same room could mean moral collapse to one person and common sense to another. This division cut through American society in ways that were regional, religious, ethnic, and class-based. Rural Protestant communities were more likely to support Prohibition. Urban immigrant communities were more likely to oppose it. Not always, but often enough that the pattern mattered. Many German Americans had brewing traditions. Many Irish and Italian communities had drinking customs woven into social and family life. Jewish congregations required wine for religious use. Catholic sacramental practice also made wine part of worship. Dry reformers sometimes frame these differences as evidence that immigrant cultures needed moral correction. That is why Prohibition cannot be separated from the nativism of the period. The suspicion of foreigners, Catholics, Jews and city dwellers who seemed to threaten an older idea of Protestant America. The law was about alcohol, but it was also about who had the power to define respectable American life. In the speakeasy, those tensions did not disappear. They sat at the tables. A wealthy Protestant businessman might drink illegal scotch while publicly praising law and order. A working-class immigrant might buy beer from a neighbourhood supplier and see no moral contradiction at all. A college student might treat the whole thing as an adventure. A gangster might see only profit. A federal agent might see a room full of evidence. A musician might see a job. A woman might see a rare public space where she could drink and dance without the same old rules pressing quite as hard against her shoulders. The same law had gathered them all into one strange economy of secrecy. And secrecy changes behaviour. It makes people alert. It creates rituals. The knock on the door, the password, the hidden bottle, the false wall, the warning bell, the quick movement of glasses when someone suspicious enters. A legal bar does not need these things. A speakeasy does. The law gave drinking a script. It created suspense where there had once been routine. It made every customer into a minor participant in theatre, even if the theatre sometimes ended with handcuffs, broken bottles, or someone slipping out the back door into an alley. This is part of why the period still fascinates people. Not because the law was wise, and not because every hidden bar was glamorous, but because the whole arrangement was so obviously unstable. A nation had tried to legislate away a habit, and the habit had come back wearing a disguise. By the time you return to that city street in the 1920s, the door looks different. It is not just an entrance anymore. It is the physical result of decades of reform, wartime politics, constitutional law, religious conviction, social fear, organised crime, and ordinary thirst. The man watching through the peephole is not merely deciding whether you may come in, he is guarding the border between the official country and the actual one. On one side is the America that declared itself dry. On the other is the America that learned where to knock. And once a person knew where to knock, once a friend had leaned close and given the address, once the correct stairway or back room or side entrance had been identified, the next challenge was getting inside without looking like someone who might bring the law with him. To find one, you usually did not begin by looking for a sign. That is the first thing to understand. A speakeasy could not announce itself in the way a legal saloon once had. There was no bright painted board over the entrance promising lager beer, no swinging doors, no open windows with men leaning out into the evening air. The old saloon belonged to the street. It wanted to be seen. A speakeasy survived by pretending to be something else. So the search began in a quieter way, through a name mentioned after dinner, an address written on the back of a business card, a nod from a hotel clerk, a taxi driver who slowed down at the right corner without being asked twice, or a friend who said very casually that there was a place he knew. This is where the ordinary street becomes interesting. In the 1920s, especially in the cities, the surface of American life could look entirely lawful, while a second life operated just beneath it. A lunchroom might sell sandwiches by day and whiskey by night. A barbershop might cut hair in the front and admit regulars through the back. A soda fountain might serve children in the afternoon and adults after dark. A respectable restaurant might keep its dining room legal, while the real money moved in a private room beyond the kitchen. A brownstone might appear to be only a residence, except that too many people arrived after 9 o'clock and left laughing after midnight. This was not always done with elaborate machinery or secret passageways, though some places had those. Much of it depended on something simpler and more human. People agreeing not to say out loud what everyone already knew. Imagine walking through a city neighbourhood in 1925. You pass a tailor, a florist, a cigar shop, a drugstore, a restaurant with curtains pulled halfway across the windows, a basement door with chipped paint, a staircase that seems to lead to a storage room, and a narrow side entrance beside a delivery alley. Most of these places are exactly what they appear to be. One of them may not be. That uncertainty is part of the atmosphere of Prohibition. The law did not erase drinking. It made the city harder to read. It turned familiar streets into layered places where the legal purpose of a building and its actual nighttime purpose might be two entirely different things. The person who knew nothing walked past. The person who knew enough stopped at the right door. How did you know? Usually someone told you. That may sound disappointingly simple, but in practice it meant everything. Speakeasies were social networks before they were physical locations. The best protection was not only a hidden entrance, it was a controlled chain of trust. You went because a friend had been there. The friend went because someone had vouched for him. The owner knew the friend, or knew the person who knew the friend, or at least knew enough about the type of customer being brought through the door. These introductions mattered because the threat was not imaginary. Federal prohibition agents did pose as customers. Local police could raid a place if the political wind shifted. Rival operators might send someone to cause trouble. A careless stranger could bring attention in a neighbourhood where attention was dangerous. The password is the detail everyone remembers, and yes, passwords existed. Sometimes they were real words or phrases given out for the night. Sometimes the password changed regularly. Sometimes it was not a word at all, but a name, a reference, a joke, a small test of belonging. But it is easy to exaggerate this part. Not every speakeasy had a dramatic peephole, and a guard asking for a phrase like something out of a detective picture. Many operated more loosely because they had police protection, local political protection, or a customer base made mostly of regulars. In some places, the doorman did not need a password. He needed to recognise your face or recognise the person beside you. In others, money itself was the password. A good suit, a confident manner, and the right companion could open doors that would remain closed to someone who looked nervous, poor, or unfamiliar. The doorman had one of the most important jobs in the entire business. He was not just a bouncer, he was the first line of defence between profit and disaster. He watched shoes, posture, age, accent, clothing, hesitation. He looked for the man trying too hard to look relaxed. He looked for the man who did not know where to put his hands. He looked for groups that arrived without the looseness of people expecting a good time. He looked for customers already too drunk to be useful. He looked for women who seemed frightened rather than amused, because a frightened person might later talk. He looked for police, of course, but police did not always look like police. That was the difficulty. Some enforcement agents made their careers by being ordinary looking. They wore disguises. They entered as labourers, tourists, musicians, college boys, travelling salesmen, or harmless fools who did not know the rules of the room. A door guard who judged only by appearances could ruin everyone. One of the most famous Prohibition enforcement teams in New York was Izzy Einstein and Mo Smith, two agents who made thousands of arrests during the early years of enforcement by using disguises and timing and a gift for appearing less dangerous than they were. Einstein, in particular, became well known for entering illegal establishments under invented identities. He posed as a musician, a gravedigger, a football player, a street cleaner, a foreign visitor, whatever the situation required. His success reveals something important. A speakeasy did not fail only when the police smashed down the door. It failed when it trusted the wrong customer. Every night was a judgment test, repeated again and again, under bad lighting, and with money waiting on the other side. For the customer, the first visit could be awkward. There was a kind of etiquette to being illegal in public, and not everyone knew it. You did not stand outside the entrance looking around too dramatically. You did not ask loudly, "Is this the place?" You did not knock as if calling the dead from a tomb. You arrived as if you had a reason to be there. You followed the person who knew the way. If there was a restaurant front, you might step inside and order something harmless first. If there was a hallway, you might continue to the back as though you had done it before. If there was a peephole, you waited without fidgeting. Confidence mattered because confidence suggested belonging. Nervousness suggested trouble. And trouble was expensive. A taxi driver could be part of this system. So could a hotel bellhop, a theatre usher, a porter, a waiter, a newspaper seller, or a shopkeeper. Cities have always depended on people who know things not written in directories. During Prohibition, that knowledge became valuable. A visitor arriving in New York or Chicago might not know which door to knock on, but a taxi driver might know exactly where to take him, especially if the visitor looked like a man willing to tip. Some drivers received money from speakeasy owners for bringing customers. Some simply knew the city as working people know cities through routes, habits, conversations, and small arrangements. If you were respectable enough, or rich enough, or foolish enough to ask the wrong person too loudly, you could still find a place by accident. But the safest way was always through someone already connected. And here is where class enters the story in a very plain way. The speakeasy was not one kind of establishment because American society was not one kind of society. The wealthy had private clubs, hotel rooms, supper clubs, and polished places with good music and imported liquor. These establishments might have doormen in formal dress, expensive cover charges, and a level of protection that came from serving people whose names mattered. A raid on such a place could embarrass powerful customers, and that alone sometimes made enforcement more careful. The middle class had restaurants, cabarets, apartment parties, and neighbourhood spots where the owner was known and the liquor was decent enough. Working class drinkers had cheaper rooms, blind pigs, back rooms, alley entrances, and places where the drink might be rough, the crowd louder, and the protection less certain. The law was national, but the experience of breaking it had a price range. Blind pig and blind tiger were older terms that continued into the Prohibition era in some places. The idea was a little absurd and very practical. A person might pay to see some supposed attraction, a blind pig, a blind tiger, some oddity in a back room, and receive a drink as part of the transaction. The fiction was thin, but thin fictions can be useful when everyone involved agrees to pretend. This kind of arrangement had existed before national prohibition, in places where local dry laws were already in force. By the 1920s, the country had simply expanded the need for such inventions. Americans did not suddenly become clever in 1920. They had been practicing evasion for a long time in counties and towns where liquor laws had already created underground habits. The outside of the speakeasy often had to look dull. Dullness was protection. A famous nightclub could eventually become known, but a neighbourhood speakeasy benefited from looking like nothing at all. A dark window, a delivery entrance, a shop closed for the day, a basement stairwell that smelled of wet brick, an unmarked door near a kitchen. Ordinary materials became part of the disguise. Crates, curtains, restaurant menus, shelves of harmless goods, a barber chair, a soda counter, stacks of laundry, a sign claiming private office or storage. The less theatrical the front, the better it could work. Modern people often imagine hidden history as something dramatic, but the real trick was usually boredom. The door survived because no honest passerby had any reason to care about it. Once inside the first layer, there might be another barrier. Some places used a small vestibule so the outer door could close before the inner one opened. Some had peepholes, some had electric buzzers, some had warning lights connected to a lookout. In better organised establishments, there were systems for raids. Bottles could be hidden quickly, bars could be covered. A room could transform in seconds from an illegal drinking place into something that looked almost innocent, at least if no one looked too closely and if the customers were sober enough to help the illusion. Trapdoors, false shelves, hidden compartments, slide-in panels and concealed cellars all belonged to the practical architecture of the era. Not every place had them, but enough did that enforcement agents learned to search walls, floors, staircases and back rooms with suspicion. Think about what that meant for the design of a night out. In a legal bar, the building is arranged for service. In a speakeasy, it is arranged for service and escape. Where is the liquor stored? How quickly can it be moved? Is there a rear exit? Can customers leave through the kitchen? Is there a roof path? Does the alley connect to another street? Can the band keep playing long enough to make a raid seem less chaotic? Can the bartender dump the evidence? Can the owner claim the bottles belong to a private party, a medical supply, a locked cabinet, someone else entirely? Every good speakeasy owner had to think like a host and a smuggler at the same time. The room had to welcome people, take their money, make them comfortable, and remain ready to deny what it was at any moment. The customers also learned the geography. Regulars knew which entrance to use and which one to avoid. They knew the table where you could see the door. They knew whether the owner had paid the police this week. They knew whether the liquor had become worse lately. They knew which nights attracted college boys, which nights attracted musicians, which nights attracted people with real money, and which nights carried the wrong kind of tension. A speakeasy had a reputation just as legal saloons had once had reputations. Some were safe, some were fashionable, some were rough, some were friendly to women, some were not. Some were known for jazz, some for dancing, some for gambling, some for watered gin and bad decisions. Finding the place was only the beginning. Learning what kind of place it was took time. There is another detail that deserves attention because it is easy to overlook. Speakeasies did not exist only in giant cities. The most famous images come from New York and Chicago because those cities had the scale, the newspapers, the nightlife, and the organised crime stories that still dominate the public imagination. But illegal drinking places appeared across the country. Small towns had them. Rural areas had them in different forms. Roadhouses outside city limits served travellers and locals away from the eyes of stricter neighbours. Private homes became drinking spaces. Fraternal lodges, social clubs, and back rooms all found ways to manage demand. The experience was different depending on place. In a big city, anonymity helped. In a small town, everyone might know exactly who was selling liquor and who was buying it, which made the secrecy less about ignorance and more about silence. That kind of silence can be stronger than a locked door. In some neighbourhoods, ethnic and community ties shaped where people drank. Italian, Irish, German, Jewish, Polish, Black, and other communities had different relationships to Prohibition, shaped by religion, work, family customs, and police attention. A stranger could not always enter simply because he had money. In a close neighbourhood, trust mattered more. The speakeasy might be less a public nightclub than a community room with illegal bottles. In black neighbourhoods, especially in cities like New York and Chicago, nightlife developed under the pressures of both prohibition and segregation. Harlem became famous for its clubs, but the glamour seen by white visitors was only one part of a much larger world of black social life, music, performance, and business. Some places catered to white tourists seeking what they imagined as exotic nightlife. Others served black patrons in spaces built by and for the community. Finding the right door depended not only on knowing where the liquor was, but knowing where you belonged, or at least where you could be tolerated. The ordinary street, then, was not neutral. A person's race, gender, class, accent, clothing, and companions affected what doors opened. A white businessman from downtown might be welcomed in one place and entirely out of place in another. A black customer might be excluded from fashionable white establishments, while also navigating police attention that white drinkers could more easily avoid. Women could enter many speakeasies in ways they would not have entered old saloons, but that did not mean every room was safe or equal. A young woman arriving with friends might be treated as part of the modern scene. A woman alone might be watched differently. Respectability had not vanished. It had merely been rearranged under dimmer lights. The city itself assisted the secrecy. Streetcars, elevated trains, taxis, and private automobiles made movement easier. A person no longer had to drink only in the immediate neighbourhood. You could cross town. You could meet people in a place where your family, employer, or church was less likely to see you. Automobiles also helped bootleggers and customers create a more mobile nightlife. Roadhouses outside city centres became popular because they sat at the edge of enforcement and respectability. A couple could drive out after dark, drink, dance, and return home with a story about visiting friends. The car gave privacy to a generation already testing boundaries. Prohibition gave them something to do with that privacy. Newspapers played their own strange role. They condemned speakeasies, reported raids, named notorious establishments, and in doing so sometimes made the forbidden world more legible. A reader could learn which areas were full of illegal drinking simply by following enforcement stories. Rumours did the rest. The more authorities insisted that certain places were dens of lawlessness, the more curious some people became. Moral outrage can accidentally function as advertising when the thing being condemned sounds more exciting than the sermon against it. A young person reading about raids in the entertainment district might not think only of crime. He might think of music, crowds, and the possibility of being where something was happening. Of course, not every search ended successfully. You could be turned away. You could be mocked for not knowing the proper name. You could arrive on a night when the place was closed because of a recent raid, or because the owner had been warned to stay quiet. You could be taken somewhere that served terrible liquor at high prices because you looked like a visitor. You could be robbed. You could be arrested. You could be watched by someone who later used your presence against you. The hidden world had rules, but those rules did not protect everyone equally. A person who romanticizes the speakeasy too much forgets that secrecy favors the person who controls the door, not necessarily the person trying to enter, and yet people kept looking. That is the revealing part. They looked despite the inconvenience, despite the risk, despite the bad liquor, despite the moral lectures, despite the chance of a raid. They looked because the speakeasy offered more than alcohol. It offered access to a room where the official mood of the country did not apply. It offered music after a day of work. It offered a date that felt modern. It offered a place to be seen by people who understood the same joke. It offered a temporary release from reformers, employers, parents, churches, and the heavy hand of public respectability. To walk through that door was to step into a version of America that had refused to obey the version printed in law books. There is something almost funny about how ordinary the beginning could be. A person might spend the day doing entirely respectable things, work at an office, sell shoes, type letters, teach school, repair machines, attend church, visit family. Then, after dark, that same person might put on a better coat, walk past a row of normal storefronts, and disappear behind a door that officially meant nothing. No revolution was declared, no speech was given, just a knock, a pause, a face at the peephole, and the small relief of being recognised. The law had turned drinking into secrecy, and secrecy had turned drinking into a ritual. Now imagine the moment after the guard decides you're safe enough. The inner door opens. For a second, the music becomes much louder. The air changes. The legal street remains behind you with its shop windows and street lamps and passing cars. Ahead is the room that everyone has been talking about without naming too clearly. You step inside, trying not to stare too much, because staring marks you as new. Your eyes adjust to the low light. Tables emerge, faces turn briefly and then turn away. A waiter moves past with a tray. Somewhere behind the bar, bottles catch the light for half a second and vanish behind moving hands. The ordinary street has done its work. It has hidden the place until the last possible moment. And now that you're inside, the question is no longer how anyone found the speakeasy. The question is what kind of world they found once the door closed behind them. The first few seconds inside a speakeasy mattered because they told you what kind of place you had entered. Before anyone handed you a glass, before you found a table, before you decided whether to act impressed or pretend this was all perfectly normal to you. The room announced itself through small details. The amount of light, the quality of the music, the smell, the clothes, the way people turned to look at the door. A cheap room and an expensive room were both illegal, but they did not feel illegal in the same way. One felt like a risk being managed with sawdust on the floor and a nervous man behind the counter. The other felt like a private club that had decided the law was a minor inconvenience meant for other people. Both could be raided. Both could sell bad liquor. Both could make a customer feel for an hour or two that the rest of the country was pretending and this room was telling the truth. Start with the light. It was rarely bright. Bright light does not help secrecy, and it does not help anyone look interesting after 3 drinks. Speakeasies used dim lamps, shaded bulbs, wall sconces, candles, table lights, anything that made the room visible without making it fully exposed. The faces nearest the tables were clear enough for conversation. The corners were allowed to remain uncertain. This was practical and social at the same time. Low light made it harder to identify everyone quickly if trouble came through the door. It also gave the room the feeling people wanted from nightlife, a sense that ordinary rules had softened. A face under low light looks less like a clerk, a wife, a salesman, a college student, a machine operator, a secretary, and more like someone temporarily free from those labels. That was part of the appeal. The darkness did some of the work. The room itself might be cramped. Many speakeasies were not spacious clubs with polished floors and perfect bands. They were back rooms, basements, converted apartments, storage spaces, private dining rooms, or old saloons reborn under new names and worse legal conditions. Tables were pushed close together because every chair could become money. A narrow bar might run along one wall. In smaller places there might be no real bar at all, just a counter, a cabinet, a table with bottles hidden underneath, or a waiter moving between the kitchen and the room. The floor might be sticky. The air might be bad. Ventilation mattered less than concealment. If the windows were covered, if the doors stayed closed, if bodies packed the room and cigarettes burned all evening, the air thickened quickly. People in the 1920s smoked constantly by modern standards, and in a crowded speakeasy the smoke became part of the building. It settled into curtains, coats, hair, tablecloths, and the wood behind the bar. In a better place, the owner tried to make illegality feel elegant. There might be a coat check, a hostess, a bandstand, framed mirrors, table service, decent glassware, a dance floor, and a menu that pretended food was the main attraction. The food mattered because restaurants had a kind of cover that pure drinking rooms did not. A supper club could claim to be a dining establishment. A cabaret could claim to be entertainment. A private club could claim to serve members. The more respectable the front, the easier it was for certain customers to feel they were not really criminals. They were dining. They were listening to music. They were attending a private gathering. The drink was present, obviously, but everyone understood the usefulness of not naming the obvious too loudly. That is one of the defining habits of the speakeasy, the agreed fiction. Everyone knew why they were there, everyone knew what the room was doing, but the language could remain slippery. A waiter might not ask if you wanted illegal whiskey. He might ask what you were having. A host might not mention alcohol in front of a stranger. Bottles might not sit openly unless the place felt secure. In some rooms, drinks were served in teacups in case the police entered, a detail so useful that it became part of the folklore of the era. Was every speakeasy full of people drinking gin out of teacups? No, but the practice existed, and it captures the strange comedy of the period. Adults sat in public pretending their cups contained tea, while everyone in the room knew perfectly well that tea had never made people sing that loudly. There were rules, even if they were not written. Do not draw attention outside. Do not shout about the place in the street. Do not bring someone untrusted without warning. Do not annoy the doorman. Do not start a fight unless you want to meet the alley. Pay in cash. Tip the people who protect your evening. If a warning came, move quickly. If the lights changed, if the music stopped in a particular way, if a waiter leaned close and told you to leave, you left. A regular understood the signals. A newcomer had to learn by watching. This is why the first few minutes inside could be uncomfortable. You had to observe without looking like you were observing. You had to settle into the room as if you had always known how. The music was not incidental. In many places it was the reason the room worked. A silent illegal bar would have been too aware of itself. Music gave people permission to relax. It filled the pauses. It covered nervous sounds. It kept conversation from floating too clearly to the walls. Jazz in particular became tied to the Prohibition nightlife of the 1920s, though not every speakeasy had jazz, and not every jazz performance happened in a speakeasy. Still, the connection was real enough to define the public memory of the decade. Trumpets, clarinets, piano, drums, banjo, saxophone, voices cutting through smoke, songs people recognised from records or live shows, rhythms that felt faster than the older world wanted them to feel. A good band could turn a hidden room into a place people talked about for weeks. A bad band could make the same room feel like a basement with expensive poison. The musicians were working people. That is important. They were not there merely to decorate the legend. They had to deal with owners, crowds, late hours, low pay, dangerous customers, and the possibility of raids like everyone else. Black musicians in particular shaped the sound of the era while facing racial discrimination inside and outside the nightlife economy. In Harlem, Chicago's South Side, New Orleans, Kansas City, and other centres of black musical life, jazz developed in conditions that were creative and exploitative at the same time. White audiences often wanted black music while still accepting segregated seating, racist door policies, and clubs where black performers entertained people who would not socialize with them as equals. A famous room could be exciting and unjust at the same time. History does not give us the comfort of choosing only one. In some speakeasies, dancing was part of the draw. The Charleston, the Black Bottom, the Foxtrot and other dances gave the body something to do in a decade already suspicious of stillness. Dancing brought men and women together in a way that could feel modern, flirtatious, and slightly alarming to older observers. Reformers had worried about alcohol, but Prohibition nightlife seemed to gather several anxieties in one place. Drinking women, dancing couples, jazz music, short skirts, smoking, late hours, and mixed company outside the control of family or church. The speakeasy became a container for every complaint about the younger generation. And to the younger generation, that may have made it more attractive. Women's presence changed the room. The pre-Prohibition saloon had usually been a male institution, especially for working-class men. Respectable women were not expected to stand at a bar among men drinking beer and whiskey. There had always been exceptions, and class mattered, but the general rule was clear enough. During Prohibition, the boundary shifted. Speakeasies and nightclubs made mixed-gender drinking more common and more visible. Women came as dates, as wives, as friends, as performers, as workers, as customers in their own right. The flapper became the symbol. Bobbed hair, shorter skirt, lipstick, cigarette, cocktail glass, a way of moving through public space that older people read as rebellion. The symbol was simplified, of course. Not every woman in a speakeasy was a flapper, and not every flapper was as free as the newspapers made her seem. But the change was real. An illegal drinking room could give women access to public leisure that the old saloon had denied them. This did not mean equality. A woman in a speakeasy was watched, judged, desired, and sometimes endangered in ways a man was not. Her clothing could be read as a statement. Her drinking could be read as character. Her presence without a male companion could attract attention. Owners liked women, customers because women made a room seem fashionable and drew men who spent money. That commercial welcome was not the same as respect. Hostesses, dancers, singers, cigarette girls and waitresses worked in an environment where charm was part of the job and protection could be uncertain. The modern feeling of the room did not erase the older imbalance between men and women. It only rearranged it under music. The customers came for different reasons. Some came because they loved to drink and would have done so under any law. Some came because it was fashionable. Some came because a date expected it. Some came because the boss brought them. Some came because business happened in rooms like this now. Deals were made over illegal liquor just as they had once been made over legal liquor. A politician might drink beside a man whose votes he wanted. A reporter might gather gossip. A police officer might relax in a place he was supposed to close. A bootlegger might check on the quality of his own supply. The room could hold people who would deny knowing one another in daylight. Here is where the word pretending matters. America was officially dry, but many Americans were not behaving as if they believed it. The hypocrisy could be almost casual. A man might vote for a dry candidate and drink in a speakeasy. A businessman might support law and order in public and keep a private supplier at home. A judge might sentence a bootlegger in the morning and attend a dinner where wine appeared in the evening. A police department might raid one place for the newspapers, while protecting another place that paid on time. This does not mean everyone drank. Millions of Americans supported Prohibition and tried to live by it. But the gap between public law and private conduct became large enough that the country developed a second language around alcohol, a language of hints, arrangements, and polite denial. Even the room's noise had a historical meaning. Laughter in a speakeasy was not only laughter. It was the sound of people making a law feel temporary. The clatter of glasses, the scrape of chairs, the band starting another number, the shouted greeting when someone familiar entered, all of it created a collective confidence. A person alone might fear the law. A room full of people breaking the same law could make the law feel absurd. That is one reason enforcement was so difficult. A raid did not only interrupt drinking, it had to puncture a mood. It had to take a room that felt socially real and remind everyone that legally, the room was built on a lie. The staff understood this better than anyone. Bartenders, waiters, musicians, doormen, cooks, lookouts, managers, and owners all performed normal hospitality under abnormal conditions. A waiter had to move quickly and remember who ordered what, but also know what to do if danger arrived. A bartender had to make drinks, manage supply, hide evidence, and judge customers. A band had to keep energy in the room, but might also need to recognize a signal to stop or change. A lookout near the entrance had to remain alert while everyone else grew less alert by the glass. The entire room depended on sober workers serving people who were paying not to be sober. The owner, if he was present, carried the heaviest calculation. Every evening involved risk and profit. How much liquor was on hand? Was it worth keeping more in the room for faster service, or safer to store it elsewhere? Had the police been paid? Were federal agents active in the neighbourhood? Was a rival place causing trouble? Were customers spending enough to justify the ban? Was the liquor good enough to keep regulars, or cheap enough to keep margins high? Could the kitchen provide enough food to support the restaurant cover? Were the exits clear? Was the doorman being too strict or not strict enough? A successful speakeasy required more than defiance. It required management. There were levels of comfort. In the finest places, a customer might forget almost entirely that the evening was illegal. The room could feel like a supper club in Paris or a fashionable hotel lounge, with polished service and imported spirits served to people whose names appeared in society pages. In rougher places, the illegality sat closer to the skin, the liquor burned, the chairs were poor, the floor was dirty. The men at the next table looked like they might fight. The owner seemed nervous. The music was too loud because loudness was cheaper than quality. A customer in such a room did not pretend the law was far away. He felt it near the door all night. Food deserves a moment because it often served both appetite and disguise. Some speakeasies offered full meals, especially those operating as restaurants or supper clubs. Others provided salty snacks because salt encourages drinking, which legal saloons had understood long before Prohibition. Sandwiches, oysters, steak, fried food, coffee, and late-night breakfast could all appear depending on the place and the price. Eating also made the evening feel more respectable. A couple could say they went out to supper. A businessman could say he met clients for dinner. A club could say it provided entertainment and meals. The drink was the profit, but the food helped the story. And stories mattered because everyone needed one. If you were stopped outside, why were you there? If your spouse asked where you had been, what did you say? If your employer saw you entering, how did you explain it? The speakeasy existed inside a culture of excuses. Some were harmless, some were elaborate, some were understood by everyone as false but accepted for the sake of peace. Prohibition did not only create criminals and bootleggers, it created liars of convenience. It taught ordinary people to maintain small separations between public respectability and private behaviour. The police relationship could be visible or invisible depending on the room. In some places, customers knew the establishment was protected because police officers drank there openly, or because raids never seemed to happen. In others, the fear was constant. A sudden knock could freeze conversation. A raised voice near the entrance could make heads turn. A waiter moving too quickly could shift the whole room's mood. The possibility of a raid gave the speakeasy a rhythm that legal nightlife did not have. Pleasure and vigilance existed together. People laughed, danced, flirted, and drank, but some part of the room remained tuned to the door. When raids did happen, the room could change instantly. Glasses disappeared under tables, bottles went into hidden compartments, customers claimed innocence, owners claimed private use, musicians might stop or keep playing badly, depending on what they had been told to do. Some places had warning systems good enough to make raids almost comic, with the illegal bar vanishing just before agents entered. Others were caught plainly, with liquor on the tables, and customers too startled to pretend. The raid was always part of the imagination of the speakeasy, even on nights when nothing happened. Its possibility added sharpness to the room. It made the drink feel more expensive than the price. Yet most of the time, people were not thinking solemnly about constitutional law while they drank. They were doing what people do in nightlife. They talked too closely. They judged clothes. They watched the door for someone they hoped would arrive. They complained about work. They made jokes. They listened to songs. They flirted. They argued. They forgot themselves for a little while. History often turns people into examples of larger forces, but inside the room they were mostly concerned with the immediate facts of the evening. Who was there? What the music sounded like? Whether the drinks were strong? Whether they had enough money? Whether the person across the table liked them? Whether the room felt lucky tonight? That ordinary human texture is what keeps the speakeasy from becoming only a symbol. It was illegal, yes. It was connected to corruption and crime, yes. But it was also a room full of people trying to have an evening. The woman adjusting her hair in a compact mirror was not thinking of herself as an example of changing gender norms. The waiter carrying 6 glasses through a narrow path was not thinking of himself as part of an underground economy. The man laughing too loudly near the piano was not thinking of federalism or the limits of moral legislation. They were living inside those things without naming them. That is usually how history happens to people. It arrives as a law, a job, a price, a door, a song, a drink. In a crowded speakeasy, the room could become warm enough that coats came off and collars loosened. The band took a break. The talking grew louder in the gap. Someone ordered another round. A waiter leaned close because privacy was impossible, but the illusion of privacy still mattered. At the bar, bottles stood for a moment where they could be seen. Some had labels, some did not. A label did not always mean much. A bottle could be refilled with something else. A fine name could hide poor contents. A drink that looked elegant could begin with liquor made in a hidden still, carried by men with guns, cut by someone trying to stretch profit, flavoured by a bartender trying to make it tolerable. That is where the room leads next, away from the tables and the music and toward the glass itself, because the most important question in a speakeasy was not always whether you could get a drink. It was what exactly had been poured into it. The glass in front of you may look simple enough. That is part of the deception. It might be a short tumbler with whiskey over a piece of ice, a narrow glass with gin and citrus, a cocktail with a sugared rim, a beer glass filled from a hidden tap, or a teacup that everyone in the room agrees not to discuss too closely. From across the table it looks like a drink, nothing more. But during Prohibition, the contents of that glass carried a longer story than most customers wanted to think about. Before it reached the table, it may have crossed a border, passed through a bribed warehouse, been poured from a bottle with a false label, been cut with water, coloured with caramel, sweetened to hide its roughness, or made from industrial alcohol that had no business being near a human mouth. The room made drinking feel social. The glass made it personal. You were the one who had to swallow what the hidden economy delivered. The first thing to understand is that there was no single speakeasy drink. The quality depended on money, geography, connections, luck, and the honesty of people who were already operating outside the law. In an expensive club with wealthy customers, you might get real imported Scotch, Canadian whiskey, French champagne, or good Caribbean rum. It would cost more than it had before Prohibition, sometimes much more, but the customer was paying not only for the liquor. He was paying for the route it travelled, the bribes attached to it, the risk of seizure, and the privilege of not worrying too much about whether it might poison him. In a cheaper back room, the same order might bring something entirely different. A bottle labelled whiskey might contain raw spirits coloured brown. Gin might be neutral alcohol flavoured quickly and badly. Rum might be a rumour with molasses in it. The name of the drink and the contents of the glass did not always maintain a close friendship. This is one of those details that takes some of the shine off the popular image of the speakeasy. The movies often show people drinking elegantly, and some people did. But a great deal of Prohibition drinking was a compromise between desire and supply. Legal alcohol had been produced in regulated distilleries, breweries, and wineries. It had known methods, professional equipment, aging time, labelling, tax records, and commercial reputation. Once that system was outlawed for beverage use, illegal suppliers stepped in. Some were skilled, some were careless, some were criminals who understood logistics better than chemistry, some were ordinary people trying to make money. The result was a marketplace where a customer could not always know what he was buying, and the bartender could not always know what he was serving. Whiskey is a useful place to begin because it carried a certain authority in American drinking culture. A good whiskey needed grain, distillation, aging, barrels, and time. Prohibition damaged that chain. Properly aged whiskey could not simply be produced overnight in a hidden shed. There were old stocks, of course. Some private cellars had them. Some medicinal supplies were real. Some smuggled bottles from Canada and elsewhere were genuine. But demand was enormous, and genuine aged whiskey could not satisfy it all, so the market filled with imitations. Raw alcohol could be coloured with caramel or burnt sugar to look like whiskey. Prune juice, tea, tobacco, oak chips, iodine, and other ingredients were sometimes used by dishonest suppliers to give young spirits the appearance of age or depth. A label might say one thing while the bottle held another. A familiar brand name became a costume that cheap liquor could wear. Gin had a different advantage. Unlike whiskey, gin did not require years in a barrel to seem plausible. It could be made quickly by flavouring neutral spirits with juniper and other botanicals, or with crude substitutes that suggested those flavours from a distance. This is one reason gin became so strongly associated with Prohibition. The phrase bathtub gin has survived because it sounds ridiculous enough to be memorable. It creates a picture of someone distilling liquor in a bathtub, which is not quite right in most cases. The bathtub was often not a still. It was a convenient large vessel with access to water, useful for mixing alcohol, flavourings and dilution. The gin itself might begin with industrial alcohol or grain alcohol obtained illegally, then be cut and flavoured in apartments, back rooms, or hidden workshops. The finished product could be harsh, but harshness could be managed. Add citrus, add sugar, add bitters, shake it cold, give it a fashionable name. Suddenly the drink seemed modern rather than desperate. Cocktails did not begin with Prohibition, but Prohibition gave them new importance. Before the ban, Americans already drank mixed drinks, punches, fizzes, sours, juleps, highballs, and other combinations. Bartending had a long professional tradition, but during Prohibition, mixing became a form of concealment. A cocktail could hide weak liquor, rough liquor, young liquor, or liquor that smelled like a chemical accident. Lemon juice, lime juice, orange juice, grenadine, cream, egg white, sugar, mint, ginger ale, cola and bitters all helped make bad spirits drinkable. Sometimes the goal was flavour. Sometimes the goal was survival of the palate. A good bartender could rescue a poor base spirit better than the customer deserved. A bad bartender could make it worse and charge anyway. That is why the Speakeasy drink menu, when there was one, could be both stylish and suspicious. A bee's knees made with gin, honey and lemon sounds charming. A south side with gin, citrus, mint and sugar sounds refreshing. A Mary Pickford with rum, pineapple juice, grenadine and maraschino sounds like Hollywood in a glass. These drinks belong to a wider cocktail culture, not all of it invented in speakeasies, and some were made beautifully in skilled hands. But the pattern is worth noticing. Sweetness, citrus, fruit, bubbles, herbs, and strong flavours did useful work in a time when the alcohol itself might be unpleasant. If a drink needed a great deal of disguise, Prohibition provided plenty of reasons. Beer suffered in a different way. Beer was bulky. It was lower in alcohol than spirits. It was harder to transport secretly in large profitable quantities. It spoiled more easily if handled badly. Legal breweries had been major public businesses before Prohibition, and some survived by making near beer, a beverage with alcohol reduced to the legal limit of 0.5%. Near beer was not supposed to intoxicate anyone, which made it an imperfect substitute for the old saloon experience. Some illegal operators found ways to spike near beer back up. Some breweries quietly produced stronger beer for illegal distribution. Some neighbourhood operations made their own. But in many speakeasies, especially those that needed to maximise profit and minimise storage, spirits made more sense. One bottle of hard liquor could do the work of many bottles of beer. The law had tried to reduce drinking and in some places helped shift people towards stronger drinks. Wine had its own strange prohibition life. Sacramental wine remained legal for religious purposes, and suddenly there was a noticeable increase in the number of people with religious or near-religious interest in obtaining wine. Some of this was legitimate, some of it was not. California grape growers, facing the collapse of legal wine markets, found another route by selling grapes and grape concentrate to households. A person could buy a brick of concentrated grape juice with instructions that warned the buyer not to dissolve it in water and leave it in a warm place for a certain number of days, because if one did, it might ferment into wine. The warning was clear enough to function as advice. This is the kind of legal comedy Prohibition produced again and again. The law forbade beverage alcohol. People learned to read between the lines printed on the package. Home production became part of the landscape. Families made wine in basements. Farmers made cider. Rural distillers made moonshine. Urban amateurs tried recipes they barely understood. Some of the results were safe enough. Some were awful. Some were dangerous. A person who had grown up around distilling or winemaking might know what he was doing. A person who only knew there was money to be made might not. Prohibition created opportunity for both. This is a recurring pattern in the era. When a product remains in demand but the legal market disappears, skill does not disappear, but neither does incompetence. The customer meets both in the glass. The most dangerous source was industrial alcohol. Alcohol was still needed legally for manufacturing fuels, medicines, perfumes, solvents, and many commercial processes. To keep people from drinking it, industrial alcohol was denatured, meaning chemicals were added to make it undrinkable. Denaturing had existed before Prohibition, but during the dry years it became a major battleground. Bootleg chemists tried to remove or disguise the denaturing agents and turn industrial alcohol back into drinkable spirits. Sometimes they succeeded well enough to sell it. Sometimes they failed. Sometimes the failure killed people. Methanol, wood alcohol, and other toxic substances could cause blindness, organ damage, paralysis, or death. Public health officials warned about poisoned liquor throughout the 1920s, but warnings did not eliminate demand. A person in a speakeasy might raise a glass without knowing whether the alcohol began as something meant for a factory. This is one of the darkest facts of Prohibition. Some of the danger was not accidental in the simple sense. Federal policy required industrial alcohol to be made more difficult and dangerous to divert for drinking. Officials knew that bootleggers were redistilling industrial alcohol, and they strengthened denaturing formulas in an attempt to stop them. The logic was enforcement through deterrence. If the alcohol could not be safely recovered, fewer people would use it for beverages. In practice, illegal suppliers continued trying, customers continued drinking, and poisonings continued. The moral burden of that is still disturbing. Bootleggers were responsible for selling dangerous liquor. Drinkers accepted risks they often did not understand. The government, determined to defend the law, made some alcohol more toxic, knowing it might enter illegal channels. Prohibition had turned a drink into a battlefield, and the casualties were not always gangsters. They were sometimes ordinary customers who trusted the wrong bottle. Not every speakeasy drink carried that level of danger, and it would be misleading to suggest everyone was courting death with each sip. Many people drank through the 1920s without being poisoned. Plenty of illegal liquor was merely mediocre. Some was excellent. Smugglers supplied genuine products to people who could pay. Canadian whiskey moved across the northern border in large quantities. Rum came through Caribbean routes and coastal smuggling networks. Ships waited offshore beyond immediate American reach, and smaller boats ran cargo in under cover of darkness, or with help from bribed officials. A bottle in a high-end speakeasy might have travelled a long way with real care. Money could not guarantee safety, but it improved the odds. Ice also mattered, more than we tend to think. A cold drink hides flaws better than a warm one. Ice had become more available in American cities through commercial ice delivery and mechanical refrigeration in some businesses, though access varied. Speakeasies that could serve well-chilled cocktails had an advantage. Cold made harsh spirits less aggressive. Shaking diluted the drink, aerated it, and softened the burn. A citrus-heavy cocktail served cold could make inferior liquor feel brighter than it was. The customer tasted the surface first. That was often enough. Glassware mattered too. A drink served in a proper glass carried reassurance. It looked intentional. It looked civilized. Even if the liquor came from a criminal supply chain, the glass could make it feel like part of a normal evening. This is something speakeasies understood instinctively. Presentation is not decoration when legitimacy is missing. A polished bar, a clean napkin, a chilled glass, a slice of lemon, a confident waiter. All of these helped customers suspend doubt. If the room looked competent, perhaps the bottle was competent too. That was not always true, but people have trusted appearances for less. The bartender's role changed under these conditions. A pre-prohibition bartender in a reputable saloon or hotel bar could take pride in known spirits, established recipes, and professional skill. Many skilled bartenders left the United States during Prohibition, working in Europe, Cuba, or elsewhere where their profession remained legal. Those who stayed had to adapt. Some worked illegally. Some served in private clubs. Some became masters at making bad ingredients acceptable. A bartender now needed not only technique but discretion. He needed to know when to speak, when to deny, when to hide bottles, when to recognize a regular, and when to suspect a stranger. The cocktail shaker became both a tool of hospitality and an accessory to a crime. The customer's knowledge varied. Some people cared deeply about what they drank. They knew brands, sources, and which places served real imports. Others only wanted intoxication. This distinction shaped the room. Wealthier customers might complain if the scotch was not genuine. A rougher crowd might complain only if the drink was weak. Some speakeasy owners watered liquor heavily to stretch profits. Others used strong, harsh spirits and relied on mixers. Some maintained quality because repeat business depended on trust. Others operated as short-lived traps for easy money. In an illegal market, reputation still mattered, but so did the ability to disappear. Women customers changed the drink culture as well. Sweet cocktails, fruit flavours, and lighter-looking drinks were often marketed or socially associated with women, though men drank them too, and women certainly drank stronger spirits. The idea that a cocktail could be stylish, modern, and less obviously raw than a straight whiskey helped make mixed drinking more acceptable in mixed company. A woman holding a colourful cocktail at a table did not look like the old caricature of a drunkard. She looked fashionable. That visual change mattered. Prohibition had intended to remove alcohol from public life. Instead, it helped produce new images of public drinking that were younger, mixed gender, and in many cases more socially fluid than the old saloon. There was another reason the contents of the glass mattered: price. Illegal drinking was expensive. The customer paid for risk at every stage. A speakeasy drink could cost far more than a legal drink had before Prohibition. In a fashionable place, the price itself became part of the appeal, a sign that the customer could afford both pleasure and danger. In cheaper places, the price still hurt. A working person buying drinks during Prohibition might be spending hard-earned money on liquor that was worse than what had once been legal and affordable. That irony was not lost on critics of the law. The dry movement had wanted to protect wages from the saloon, but illegal drinking could drain money just as effectively, with added dangers and criminal profit layered on top. The glass also carried status. Imported liquor suggested wealth. Champagne suggested celebration and access. Whiskey suggested older masculine habits. Gin cocktails suggested modern nightlife. Beer suggested continuity with the old saloon world. Homemade wine suggested domestic evasion. Medicinal whiskey suggested respectability with a wink. People did not always think about these signals consciously, but they understood them. What you drank, where you drank it, and how openly you joked about it placed you within the complicated social map of the era. Now place that glass back on the table inside the speakeasy. The band is playing again. The room is louder than it was 20 minutes ago. The first round has softened the stiffness of newcomers. People lean closer. A couple at the next table has stopped pretending not to flirt. Someone laughs too hard at a joke that was not good enough to deserve it. The waiter returns and asks if there will be another. This is the moment when prohibition becomes less about law and more about trust. You trust the person who brought you here. You trust the owner not to cheat you too badly. You trust the bartender not to pour something lethal. You trust the police not to come through the door. You trust your own judgment after the first drink begins weakening it. That may be the most honest way to describe what was in the glass. It was alcohol, yes, in all its forms: smuggled whiskey, raw gin, doctored spirits, illegal beer, homemade wine, rum from the coast, medicinal bottles, industrial alcohol made drinkable or only made drinkable enough. But it was also uncertainty. Every drink contained a question the customer usually chose not to ask too carefully. Where did this come from? Who made it? Who profited? Who was paid to look away? How strong is it? What has been added? What has been hidden? In a legal system, these questions are partly answered by regulation, labelling, inspection, and habit. In the speakeasy, the answers depended on rumour, price, reputation, and luck. And still the glasses kept moving. That is the part that makes the room feel so human. People knew enough to be cautious, but not enough to stop. They heard stories of poisonings and raids, of bad liquor and fake labels, of men going blind from the wrong bottle, and then they went out anyway. Not everyone, of course, but enough people to sustain an entire underground industry for 13 years. Desire has a way of negotiating with danger. It tells itself that bad things happen elsewhere, to other people, in worse places, with cheaper drinks. It says this place is known. This bartender is careful. This bottle looks right. This friend has been here before. That is often all the reassurance a person needs. The waiter sets down another glass. The liquid catches the low light for a moment. It looks harmless. Most dangerous things do, until the story around them is explained. Across the room, people who would never agree on politics, religion, money or morality are participating in the same illegal ritual. They lift their glasses, complain about the law, laugh at the risk, flirt with someone they should not flirt with, and order again. But the drink is only one part of the room. To understand why the speakeasy mattered, you have to look at the people holding those glasses, because the room drew together a mix of Americans who were not supposed to share the same kind of night, and once they were seated under the same low ceiling, the old categories did not vanish, but they did begin to behave in strange ways. Look around the room for a while and the speakeasy stops being a single image. At first it may seem like one crowd, one warm illegal room, one mass of laughter and smoke and music. But after a few minutes, the separate lives inside it become clearer. The young woman with the bobbed hair and cigarette holder is not there for the same reason as the man in the back booth who seems to know the owner. The trumpet player on the small bandstand is not having the same night as the couple, ordering their second round. The waiter carrying a tray is not part of the same story as the police officer standing near the entrance with his coat still on. Everyone is gathered under the same low ceiling, but they did not arrive by the same path, and they will not face the same consequences if the door opens at the wrong moment. Start with the flapper, because she is the person people most often imagine first. She has become almost inseparable from the speakeasy in public memory. Short dress, bobbed hair, beads, lipstick, a cigarette, a cocktail, and a way of sitting that seems designed to irritate her grandmother. The image is exaggerated, but not invented. The 1920s did produce a visible new style of young womanhood, especially in cities. Hemlines rose compared with the earlier decades. Hair was cut shorter. Cosmetics became more common in public. Young women went to dances, theatres, cabarets and speakeasies with an ease that shocked older observers who had grown up with stricter rules around female respectability. The flapper was not every woman in America. She was not even most women. But she became a symbol because she made change visible. You could see the argument about modern life in her hair, her dress, her cigarette, and the glass in her hand. To understand why her presence mattered, remember what the old saloon had been. Before Prohibition, the saloon was largely a male space. Respectable women did not usually enter. A wife might wait at home while a husband drank. A daughter might be warned away from such places entirely. Reformers had attacked saloons partly because they seemed to pull men away from the family and into a world of male pleasure and political influence. But when Prohibition closed legal saloons and drinking moved into speakeasies, the social rules shifted. These new rooms did not carry the same old sign over the door. They could present themselves as restaurants, clubs, cabarets, or private parties. Women could enter without seeming to cross quite the same boundary, though moralists would have disagreed strongly. The illegal room created a new kind of public nightlife, and women stepped into it. That does not mean the speakeasy liberated women in any simple way. It gave some women more access to public pleasure, but it also turned them into part of the room's appeal. Owners wanted women present because women changed the atmosphere. A room with women looked fashionable, modern, less like an old saloon, and more attractive to men with money. A group of stylish young women could make a place seem successful before a single drink was served. That gave women a certain social power, but it was a limited and often commercial kind of power. They were welcomed because their presence helped sell the night. They were watched because their behaviour still carried heavier judgment than men's behaviour did. A man drinking too much might be embarrassing. A woman drinking too much could be treated as evidence that the whole age had gone bad. Some women in the room had jobs there. Singers, dancers, hostesses, cigarette girls, coat check attendants, waitresses and entertainers all worked inside Prohibition nightlife. Their labour was often hidden behind the glamour of the setting. A singer standing near the piano might look carefree, but she had to manage drunk customers, late hours, uncertain pay, and the risk of being associated with an illegal establishment. A hostess had to be charming without losing control of the interaction. A cigarette girl moving between tables had to smile, sell, avoid hands that lingered too long, and understand which men were harmless and which were not. These women were part of the speakeasy economy, not merely decorations inside it. Their work helped make the room feel effortless for customers who paid to forget effort existed. Across the room, there may be a gangster, though not always the kind the movies have trained us to expect. He may not wear a white suit or announce danger with every gesture. He may look like a businessman because in many ways he is one. Prohibition did not invent organised crime, but it gave criminal organisations a product with national demand and enormous profit potential. Men who had experience with gambling, prostitution, protection rackets, theft, and political corruption found that liquor could be moved, marked up, and defended in ways that made fortunes. In Chicago, figures like Johnny Torrio and Al Capone became famous because bootlegging connected crime, business, politics, and violence on a scale newspapers could not ignore. But the gangster at the table in a speakeasy might not be famous. He might be a local operator, a supplier, an enforcer, a driver, a collector, a man whose importance is known only within a few blocks. He does not need to own the place to matter. He may supply the liquor. He may protect the owner from rivals. He may make sure payments go where they are supposed to go. He may have friends in the police department or in city government. The speakeasy owner who seems independent might actually be tied to a larger network of obligation. If the liquor comes from a gang-controlled source, if protection money is paid, if a rival crew is not allowed to sell in the neighbourhood, then the room belongs partly to people who are not visible behind the bar. This is one reason the speakeasy could feel safe and dangerous at the same time. The same criminal system that made the room possible could also bring violence to its door. It would be wrong, though, to imagine every speakeasy as a gangster headquarters. Many were small businesses, neighbourhood operations, private clubs, or side ventures run by people trying to make money in a market the law had created. Some owners were ordinary restaurant men who had watched legal alcohol revenue disappear and found a way to survive. Some were former saloon keepers who understood customers better than they understood the new moral order. Some were women, some were immigrants, some were opportunists, some were careful, some were reckless. Organised crime grew rich from Prohibition. but the underground alcohol economy was too large and varied to belong entirely to famous mobsters. The danger of the gangster image is that it can make the era seem more organised than it really was. Much of it was messy, local, improvised, and held together by cash. The workers at the tables and behind them deserve more attention than they usually receive. The waiter carrying drinks through the crowd is doing illegal work for practical reasons. He may have a family. He may have lost legal employment. He may earn better tips here than in a lawful restaurant. He also carries risk on his tray. If the place is raided, he can be arrested along with the owner and customers. If a customer becomes violent, he may be the first person in reach. If the liquor is bad, he hears the complaints. If the owner is dishonest, he may not be paid properly. The glamour of the speakeasy depended heavily on people whose own nights were not glamorous at all. The bartender stands at the centre of this labour. A good bartender in a speakeasy needed memory, speed, discretion and calm hands. He had to know who drank what, who paid, who tipped, who talked too much, who was likely to cause trouble, and who should not be served another. He had to understand the stock. Which bottles were real? Which were stretched? Which were for wealthy customers only? Which spirits needed heavy mixing to hide their flaws? In a legal bar, a bartender's skill might be judged by taste and service. In a speakeasy, skill included the ability to survive. If agents entered, he needed to know what to hide and how quickly. If questioned, he needed a story. If the owner had arranged a warning system, he needed to react before customers understood what was happening. Musicians lived in a different but related kind of uncertainty. The speakeasy needed them because music made the room feel alive. Jazz musicians, pianists, singers, drummers, and small bands gave illegal nightlife its pulse. Yet musicians could be caught in the same raids as everyone else, and black musicians especially navigated racial barriers while providing the sound that made many clubs profitable. A black band might perform for white patrons who would not share equal social status with them. A musician might be admired on stage and humiliated off stage. In some cities, nightlife opened opportunities that formal concert halls and respectable institutions denied, but those opportunities existed inside a segregated and unequal society. A song could bring a room together for 3 minutes without changing the rules waiting outside the door. Ordinary workers came as customers too. It is easy to focus on the fashionable crowd, but prohibition drinking was not limited to the wealthy or stylish. Factory workers, clerks, salesmen, dock workers, drivers, office workers, reporters, students, mechanics, and shop employees all found their way into illegal drinking spaces. Some wanted the same things saloons had once provided: company, warmth, habit, release after work. Others wanted the novelty of the hidden room. For working people, the speakeasy could be expensive, so the choice to go carried weight. A night out might mean spending money that could have gone elsewhere. That was one reason temperance reformers remained angry. They saw the underground market recreating the same household harms they had wanted to end, but now with higher prices and criminal suppliers. The class differences inside the room could be obvious. A wealthy customer might receive better liquor, better service, and better protection. He might sit in a booth away from the door, known by name, shielded from trouble. A working man might stand near the bar, drink what he could afford, and leave if the mood turned wrong. A society woman in a fashionable club might treat the whole experience as daring amusement. A poor woman working in that same club might experience it as a job with risks she could not easily refuse. Prohibition created shared illegality, but shared illegality did not erase inequality. If the police came, some people had lawyers, names and influence. Others had only bad luck. Then there are the police. They may be outside, inside, honest, corrupt, bored, watchful, or already paid. The phrase watchful police sounds simple until you ask what they are watching for. Some watched for violations because they believed in the law. Some watched for an opportunity to collect a bribe. Some watched for rival establishments on behalf of the one that paid them. Some watched federal agents watching them. The enforcement world of prohibition was tangled. Local police and federal prohibition agents did not always have the same goals or loyalties. A federal raid could embarrass local officers who had been pretending a place did not exist. A local crackdown might be sincere, political, or staged for public approval. Customers did not always know which kind of lawman they were looking at. A policeman in uniform entering a speakeasy could mean many things. He might be there to close the place. He might be there to drink. He might be there to collect money. He might be there to warn the owner that a raid was coming from someone else. A plainclothes officer was even harder to read. The uncertainty made every unfamiliar man a possible threat. Yet the presence of police could also reassure customers if everyone understood the arrangement. If a known officer sat quietly in the corner, that might mean protection had been paid. It might mean the evening was safer, at least from local interference. That is one of the moral inversions of prohibition. A police officer in a drinking room could be a danger to the business or part of the business. Corruption did not require every officer to be corrupt. It required enough of them, in the right positions, to make enforcement unreliable. The money was simply too large and too constant. A speakeasy that paid regularly might be warned before raids or ignored during patrols. A truck carrying liquor might pass through if the right people had received the right envelopes. A politician might protect establishments that supported his machine. This was not a side effect of prohibition. It became one of its central operating conditions in many places. The law created a market, the market created profits, and the profits searched for protection. Police departments, courts, city governments, and federal agencies all felt the pressure. For honest enforcement officers, the situation could be maddening. They faced a public that often laughed at the law, local officials who did not always cooperate, juries reluctant to convict, judges who varied in seriousness, and criminals with more money than many government agencies had resources. Raiding one speakeasy did not end the business. Another opened, sometimes in the same neighbourhood, sometimes under a new name. Seizing liquor raised headlines, but supply continued. Arresting low-level workers did not touch the larger networks. An honest officer could spend a career pushing against a tide that the country itself had not fully decided it wanted stopped. Customers sensed this contradiction. That's why the police presence in a speakeasy could produce less fear than one might expect, at least among regulars. People had learned the difference between danger and theatre. A raid announced in advance might be theatre. A token arrest might be theatre. A public smashing of bottles might satisfy newspapers while the real supplies continued. But a sudden federal raid, a rival gang attack, or a local political shift could be real. The skill was knowing which kind of night you were in. Most customers were not experts. They relied on the room's mood. If the staff seemed calm, they stayed calm. If the owner vanished, they noticed. The gangsters and the police were not always separate worlds. That is another uncomfortable truth. Prohibition encouraged relationships between criminals and officials because both controlled parts of the same illegal market. A gang could not operate comfortably without some knowledge of enforcement patterns. A corrupt official could not profit without suppliers and owners willing to pay. This did not mean every officer was bought or every politician was owned, but it did mean that the speakeasy often stood at the meeting point of public authority and private crime. The same doorway admitted customers, suppliers, musicians, and sometimes the law itself, arriving not as an enemy, but as a partner. Among the ordinary customers there were people who did not want to think about any of this. They came for the evening, not for the structure behind it. A typist came with friends because the music was good. A salesman came because a client wanted to drink. A young couple came because the place made them feel adult and modern. A married man came because he missed the old saloon and did not want to say so. A wealthy woman came because everyone she knew had been talking about the place. A labourer came because payday still meant a drink. These people did not necessarily see themselves as participants in a national legal crisis. They saw themselves as thirsty, bored, curious, lonely, fashionable, tired, or in need of company. History often looks more organised from a distance than it feels to the people living it. The room could also produce unexpected proximity. People who might not meet in daylight could sit near one another after dark. A clerk might share a table with a reporter. A politician might pass a musician in the hallway. A debutante might laugh at a joke told by a bootlegger without knowing exactly how he earned his money. A police officer might recognise a judge across the room and choose not to recognise him too clearly. This mixing had limits. Race, class, and gender boundaries remained powerful. But the speakeasy did create situations where the official social map blurred at the edges, illegality made strange neighbours, and everyone watched everyone else a little. That is the part that is easy to miss beneath the music. The flapper watched to see who admired her and who judged her. The gangster watched the door and the owner watched the police. The waiter watched the customers' hands, faces and glasses. The musician watched the mood of the crowd. The honest officer watched for evidence. The corrupt officer watched for payment. The ordinary customer watched for signs of danger and for the person he hoped would arrive. In a legal club, people watch one another because nightlife is social. In a speakeasy, they watched because the room depended on reading signals correctly. The longer the evening went on, the less reliable those readings became. Alcohol loosened the very caution that allowed the place to operate. A customer who entered quietly might leave loudly. A man who promised discretion might boast. A woman who intended to stay an hour might stay until the room felt less safe. A fight could begin over an insult, a debt, a romantic jealousy, or a spilled drink. The doorman's careful screening could not prevent every problem once the drinks were moving. Speakeasy owners had to manage not only police risk, but human unpredictability. The law was a danger outside the room. Drunkenness was a danger inside it. Still, when the room worked, it worked, because all these people performed their roles at once. The flapper made the room look modern. The workers made it function. The musician gave it rhythm. The bartender gave it taste, or at least the appearance of taste. The gangster, visible or hidden, helped supply it. The police, honest or corrupt, shaped its boundaries. The customers filled it with money and noise. The entire room was an arrangement, unstable but effective, built on need, profit, and the shared desire to keep the night going a little longer. By now, the tables are crowded. The band has found the tempo that makes conversation rise instead of stop. The doorman has admitted several more people and refused one man who argued too loudly outside. A waiter slips between chairs with a tray held above shoulder height. The owner leans towards someone near the bar and receives information in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. At one table, a young woman laughs with her head turned toward the light. At another, a man with a heavy ring on his finger watches the entrance without seeming to move. Near the door, a police officer stands for a moment longer than comfort allows. Nobody knows yet whether he is a customer, a warning, or the beginning of a bad night. The room continues as if nothing has changed, because in a speakeasy that was part of the skill. You kept talking, you kept drinking, you kept the music going, and then sometimes the signal came too late. The signal could be almost nothing. A light above the bar flickering once. A bell pressed from the front entrance. A waiter moving too quickly through the room. The doorman stepping inside when he normally stayed out. The owner's face changing before his body did. People who had been in the place long enough learned to notice these things. They might keep talking for a second, because no one wanted to be the first person to panic. They might turn their heads toward the door while pretending not to. The musicians might keep playing, but with less confidence. A room that had been loose and loud a moment earlier could tighten all at once, not into silence yet, but into attention. That was the first sound of a raid, not boots, not shouting. The first sound was usually the room hearing itself become afraid. Sometimes there was enough warning. That was the ideal if anything about the situation can be called ideal. A lookout saw the police or federal agents approaching. A friendly officer sent word ahead. A taxi driver, paid to notice trouble, hurried in through the kitchen. A man posted near the street recognised someone from the Prohibition Bureau. A signal reached the bar, and suddenly the place became a machine built for denial. Bottles disappeared under counters. Cases moved behind false walls. Glasses were swept from tables or replaced with coffee cups. A bartender dumped liquor into a sink, a bucket, a floor drain, or a hidden chute. Waiters collected evidence faster than they had collected empty plates all evening. Customers were told to sit still, leave through the back, or pretend they had come only for food. If the system worked, the room could change its identity in less than a minute. The trick was not to remove every sign of drinking. That was often impossible. The trick was to remove enough to create doubt, or at least enough to make the raid less profitable. Enforcement depended on evidence. Agents wanted liquor, bottles, sales, witnesses, marked money, records, or some visible proof that the establishment was violating the law. A room full of nervous people was suspicious, but suspicion alone was not always enough. Owners understood this and designed their places accordingly. Liquor might be kept in small quantities near the bar and larger quantities elsewhere. A bottle used for service might be easy to sacrifice, while the real stock stayed hidden. A wall panel, a floorboard, a dumbwaiter, a coal chute, a basement compartment, a concealed cabinet. Any of these could become part of the room's survival plan. Some places had elaborate devices. A lever behind the bar could tilt shelves or drop bottles into a hidden space. A warning buzzer could reach the band, kitchen and front door at once. A false pantry could hold cases behind ordinary goods. A trapdoor could lead to a cellar where liquor was stored out of sight. In a few famous establishments, the engineering became almost comic in its ambition, as if Prohibition had turned bar owners into amateur stage magicians. But most places relied on quicker and simpler methods. Hide what you can, dump what you must, move the customers, keep calm, and hope the officers had not arrived too soon. When there was no warning, the room broke differently. The door opened hard. Men entered with authority in their movements, and the music stopped because nobody needed a signal then. A shouted announcement might follow. Federal agents, police. Nobody move. Hands where they could be seen. The words varied, but the effect was the same. Conversation collapsed. Chairs scraped. Someone swore. Someone laughed too loudly because fear sometimes comes out that way. A glass tipped over. A woman pulled her coat tighter around herself as if clothing could make her less visible. A man near the back tried to stand and was told to sit down. The band, which had been the room's heartbeat, became a cluster of workers holding instruments they no longer knew what to do with. The moment of stillness after the music stopped must have been one of the strangest sensations in Prohibition nightlife. A speakeasy depended on noise. Noise made the room feel safe, crowded, normal. When the music stopped, the room became what it legally was, a gathering of people surrounded by evidence. The silence made every small sound sharper. Ice settling in a glass, shoes shifting on the floor. A bottle knocked against wood behind the bar. The breath of someone trying to remain calm. In that silence, people could suddenly hear the foolishness of their own confidence. A few minutes earlier, the law had seemed like a distant inconvenience. Now it had a hand on the door. Raids varied widely. Some were almost orderly. Agents entered, identified themselves, searched the premises, seized liquor, arrested owners or staff and took names. Customers might be questioned, embarrassed, or released. In other cases, raids were rough. Doors were smashed, bottles were broken. Furniture was overturned. People ran. Officers chased them. Someone resisted. Someone was injured. The public image of the raid often depended on who was telling the story. A dry newspaper might present agents as brave defenders of the law, storming a den of corruption. A wet newspaper might portray the same raid as heavy-handed foolishness or political theatre. The customers told a third version, usually centred on how close they came to getting caught. The difference between local police and federal agents mattered. Local police often knew the neighbourhood, the owner, the regulars, and the political arrangements around the place. Some were sincere, some were compromised. Some participated in raids only when ordered to. Federal prohibition agents could be more disruptive because they were less tied to local arrangements, though they too varied in honesty and competence. A speakeasy protected by local payoffs might still fear federal attention. That is why the sight of unfamiliar lawmen could change the air more dramatically than a known officer dropping by. Corruption worked best when everyone understood the pattern. A federal raid could break the pattern. For the owner, a raid was business disaster and business expense at the same time. Fines, arrests, seized liquor, damaged property, legal fees and temporary closure could hurt badly. But many operators treated raids as part of the cost of doing business. If profits were high enough, a raid did not necessarily end the establishment. The place might reopen under a new name, in a new room, with a different entrance, or even in the same building after a period of caution. Some owners expected to be raided occasionally. Some arranged small sacrificial losses, keeping enough liquor visible to satisfy an action while hiding the more valuable stock. The underground market was flexible because demand did not stop when one door closed. The law had a tool known informally as padlocking. If a place was found to be a nuisance under prohibition enforcement, authorities could seek to close the premises for a period of time, literally padlocking the building so it could not be used. This was meant to strike at the place itself rather than only the people operating it. In theory, it made sense. If owners kept reopening after ordinary raids, close the property. In practice, the results depended on courts, local enforcement, property owners, and the ability of operators to relocate. A padlocked door could make a strong public statement, but another door somewhere else might open the same week. Customers had their own hierarchy of fear. For some, the worst consequence was arrest. For others, it was publicity. A wealthy customer might be less afraid of a fine than of having his name printed in the newspaper. A married man might fear his wife seeing his name. A respectable woman might fear social disgrace. A politician might fear opponents using the incident. A college student might fear parents. A worker might fear losing his job. The legal penalty mattered, but reputation could matter more. This is one reason raids produce such panic, even when the practical consequences for customers might be limited. The speakeasy did not only hide illegal drinking, it hid people's alternate selves. Newspapers loved names when they could get them. A raid on a fashionable establishment could become a social event in print. Readers wanted to know who had been present, especially if prominent people were involved. The embarrassment could be delicious to the public. Respectable citizens caught in illegal rooms made good copy. That newspaper exposure reveals another contradiction of the era. Many people wanted to drink quietly, but many also wanted to read about other people getting caught. Moral judgment and curiosity sat comfortably together over breakfast. For staff, the stakes could be more serious. The bartender, waiter, doorman, owner and supplier were more exposed than the customer who claimed he had only arrived for supper. Workers could face arrest, fines, job loss, or violence from employers and criminal associates if they were suspected of talking. The doorman who failed to spot an agent might pay for that failure. A bartender who did not dump liquor fast enough might cost the owner money. A waiter caught serving drinks could not easily pretend he had no idea what kind of place this was. The people who made the evening possible carried more of the legal risk than the people who bought the evening. Musicians occupied an uneasy position. They might insist they had been hired to play, not to sell liquor. That was often true, but being in the room still exposed them to raids, lost wages, and association with illegal nightlife. A band might pack up quickly if warned, or sit through the raid with instruments in hand while officers searched around them. For black musicians, the risk could be compounded by the racism of policing and the unequal treatment already present in nightlife. A white customer with social connections and a black musician working for pay did not face the same room when law entered it. The same raid could become a story of embarrassment for one person and real danger for another. There were also the bottles themselves. During a raid, bottles became evidence and objects of performance. Agents seized them, catalogued them, smashed them, poured them out, or displayed them for newspapers. Photographs of confiscated liquor helped enforcement agencies show the public they were doing something. Barrels being broken, bottles stacked in evidence rooms, agents standing beside captured cases of whiskey. These images became part of the visual language of Prohibition. They reassured dry supporters that the law had force. They showed wet opponents the scale of continued drinking. Either way, the bottles kept testifying. Sometimes the raid was less about the place than about politics. A newly elected official might need to prove seriousness. A police commissioner under criticism might order a crackdown. A reform group might pressure authorities. A newspaper campaign might make inaction embarrassing. When that happened, establishments that had operated comfortably could suddenly find themselves vulnerable. Protection was not permanent. Bribes were not guarantees. Political winds changed. Owners who had paid the right people could discover that the right people no longer had enough power. This uncertainty made Prohibition enforcement feel arbitrary to many. One speakeasy was closed, while another stayed open. One owner was punished while another prospered. The law was national, but consequences arrived unevenly. Customers learned to interpret raids as part of the city's weather. There were seasons of pressure and seasons of ease. Rumours spread quickly. Federal men are work in this district. Stay away from that place. The club on the corner got hit last night. The owner of the restaurant has protection. The new captain is dry. The mayor wants headlines. This place is safe until election week. These rumours shaped behaviour more than official statements did. A person planning an evening did not consult the Constitution. He consulted friends, drivers, bartenders, and gossip. That was the actual map of risk. Inside the raid itself, the behaviour of customers could be revealing. Some became indignant, insisting they were respectable citizens being harassed. Some became quiet and practical. Some tried to slip out. Some gave false names. Some joked with officers they recognised. Some were too drunk to understand the seriousness of the moment. A few treated the entire thing as an adventure to be retold later. For young people especially, being caught in a raid could become part of the thrill, provided the consequences were light. This infuriated dry reformers, who saw not shame but amusement. The law wanted to teach obedience. In some circles it produced stories people told with pride, yet fear was real. Do not let the glamour erase that. When officers entered, people did not know how the night would end. A raid could become violent if someone ran, resisted, or reached for a weapon. Gang-controlled establishments could carry dangers beyond arrest. Rivalries, armed guards, hidden money, and illegal supply chains meant that not every room was merely a party. Customers who had treated danger as atmosphere could suddenly encounter danger as fact. A gun in a drawer, a fight at the door, a panicked rush toward the back exit, a fall on the stairs, a club swinging through a crowd. These things belonged to the less polished side of Prohibition nightlife. The back exit had its own place in the imagination. Many speakeasies had one if the building allowed it. Customers might be pushed through kitchens, alleys, basements, or connecting rooms. A woman in good shoes might find herself stepping through grease, coal dust, or wet pavement while trying to avoid arrest. A man who had entered through a discreet front door might leave through a garbage alley. That reversal captures something honest about the speakeasy. It offered elegance at the table, but its escape routes were often ugly. The hidden system behind the glamour was made of service corridors, bribed warnings, hurried lies, and doors that stuck when they were needed most. If the raid succeeded, the room after the search looked deflated, tables out of place, chairs overturned, spilled drinks spreading across the floor, broken glass, cigarette smoke still hanging above a room that no longer knew what it was. The band silent. Customers gone or waiting miserably. Staff questioned. The owner calculating losses. A place built around motion and sound became a room of inventory. Bottles seized, names taken, charges listed, damage assessed. The transformation was brutal because it stripped away the shared fiction. Without music, low light, service and confidence, a speakeasy could look like what it often was underneath. A rented room with illegal liquor and a bad plan. For the dry movement, raids were proof that enforcement mattered. Each seizure suggested that the law could reach hidden places. Each arrest gave reformers evidence that the nation had not surrendered. But raids also proved the opposite to critics. If there were so many places to raid, how successful could the law be? If customers kept returning, what had fear achieved? If the same neighbourhood produced another hidden bar after one was closed, was the country enforcing morality, or merely chasing it from door to door? Prohibition created a cycle that became familiar. Open, profit, pay, warn, raid, close, reopen. Each turn of the cycle weakened the idea that the law had settled the question. The emotional effect of a raid did not end when the customers left. Someone had to explain the night. A husband came home late and invented a reason. A young woman worried whether her name would appear in print. A waiter wondered if he still had a job. A musician lost pay. An owner called a lawyer. A police officer filed a report that might tell the whole truth. Part of it, or almost none of it. Bottles went to evidence storage or disappeared before they got there. The city absorbed the event and moved on. By the next evening, people were already asking which places were still safe. This is what makes the raid such a clear window into the Prohibition years. It reveals every part of the system at once. The law entering with badges, the business scrambling to hide its product, the customers caught between pleasure and respectability, the workers exposed in ways the guests were not. The criminals, visible or hidden, calculating loss, the newspapers waiting for names, the reformers looking for proof, the city deciding how much it really wanted to know. A raid was not an interruption of the story. It was the story briefly becoming honest. And then there were the nights when no raid came. Those matter too. Most evenings in most speakeasies did not end with agents bursting through the door. Most ended in the usual ways. Customers paid, coats were collected, musicians packed instruments, bottles were hidden again, floors were swept, and someone counted the cash. The possibility of a raid shaped the night, but its absence allowed the business to continue. Fear became part of the atmosphere rather than a constant emergency. People got used to it. That may be the most revealing fact of all. Americans became accustomed to drinking in rooms that might be invaded by law and went anyway. Return to the room after the signal. In one version, the warning came early. The bottles are hidden, the customers calm themselves, the officers find less than they hoped, and the night survives in a damaged form. In another version, the warning fails. The door opens, the music stops, the room freezes, and everyone inside discovers exactly how thin the wall is between amusement and consequence. Either way, by the time the last glass is cleared and the last frightened customer steps into the street, the speakeasy has done more than serve liquor. It has shown how a country can live in two realities at once, one written in law and one practiced after dark. And as the night thins toward morning, with taxis moving through wet streets and tired musicians carrying cases down back stairs, the question left behind is not only why people kept drinking, it is what all those hidden rooms changed while the country was busy pretending they were not there. By the time morning came, the speakeasy looked smaller. That is true of many rooms after the night is over. In the dark, with the band playing and the tables full and the glasses moving, the place could feel like its own country. It had rules, money, music, protection, danger, and a population that understood the local language. But after the last customers left and the door was locked from the inside, the room became practical again. Chairs had to be stacked or pushed back into place, Ashtrays had to be emptied, spilled liquor had to be wiped from tables, broken glass had to be swept carefully from the floor. The bottles that survived the night had to be counted, hidden, or moved. Someone had to pay the musicians, someone had to settle with the waiters, someone had to check the alley for anything left behind by a hurried customer. Someone had to decide whether the place would open again that evening, or whether the neighbourhood felt too watched now. This is where the speakeasy becomes less glamorous, but more revealing. It was not only a place people went after dark. It was a business that had to survive the morning. Every night created money, risk, waste, gossip, and evidence. Every morning required clean-up. A legal bar could leave bottles on shelves and unlock the front door again when it was time. A speakeasy had to return to disguise. If it operated behind a restaurant, the restaurant had to look innocent by lunch. If it used a basement, the stairway had to become uninteresting again. If it ran from a private apartment, the apartment had to absorb the smell of smoke and liquor before the neighbours began asking too many questions. The ordinary street had hidden the place at night. By morning, the place had to hide itself all over again. The people who left at the end of the night carried different versions of what had happened. A wealthy customer might remember the music and the thrill of getting away with something. A waiter might remember sore feet and a customer who did not tip. A musician might remember a good set ruined by a nervous owner. A young woman might remember being looked at in a way she liked, or in a way she did not. A bootlegger might remember how much stock moved. A police officer might remember who had paid and who had not. A reformer reading about raids in the morning paper might see national decay. A critic of prohibition might see national common sense fighting back. The same room produced all of these meanings, and none of them was entirely false. What did the speakeasy leave behind? The easiest answer is style. That is the part still sold back to us today. Hidden doors, password bars, dim lighting, jazz records, antique glassware, bartenders in waistcoats, menus that pretend secrecy is still dangerous even when the liquor license is framed properly on the wall. Modern speakeasy-themed bars exist because the original speakeasy created a strong image. A door you had to know about, a room separated from ordinary life, a drink that felt like access. Even now, when alcohol is legal and easy to buy, people still like the feeling of entering a place not everyone noticed. The secret has become a decoration, but it works because the old desire is still there. We like doors that make us feel chosen, but the real legacy is much larger than style. The speakeasy changed American nightlife by helping break the old saloon model. Before Prohibition, the saloon had been public, male, often working class, tied to beer, politics, and neighbourhood life. After Prohibition began, drinking moved into new kinds of spaces: restaurants, clubs, cabarets, private rooms, apartments, hotel suites, and roadhouses. Some of those spaces included women more openly. Some paired drinking with live music and dancing in ways that helped shape the modern nightclub. When legal drinking returned, the country did not simply rebuild the old saloon exactly as it had been. The years underground had changed expectations. People had become accustomed to mixed company, cocktails, table service, entertainment, and nightlife that looked less like a bar room and more like an evening out. Cocktail culture was also reshaped. It had existed long before Prohibition, but the dry years pushed mixed drinks into a new role. Cocktails could disguise bad liquor, yes, but they also became part of the social language of the 1920s. They sounded modern. They looked modern. They could be ordered by women and men in the same room. They belonged to hotels, clubs, ships, parties, and illegal bars. When skilled American bartenders left for Europe, Cuba, and other places where they could work legally, they carried American drink traditions with them and helped internationalize cocktail culture. When Prohibition ended, the United States got some of that culture back, changed by exile, improvisation, and the long habit of making rough spirits more presentable than they deserved. The speakeasy also left behind a harder lesson about organised crime. It did not create every criminal network, but it fed them. Illegal alcohol provided a product that millions of Americans wanted and the law made valuable. That combination gave criminals money, influence, and public visibility on a scale that shaped the history of American policing and politics. Gangs fought over territory, supply lines, protection arrangements, and profits. Violence connected to bootlegging became part of the public image of the era, especially in cities like Chicago. Al Capone became famous not only because he was violent and wealthy, but because Prohibition made him legible to the whole country. People understood what he sold. Some condemned him. Some were fascinated by him. Some bought from the system that enriched him while claiming to dislike criminals. That contradiction was central to the period. Corruption was another inheritance. Prohibition did not invent bribery, but it gave bribery a steady reason to appear. Police, politicians, inspectors, judges, clerks, and agents all operated in an environment where the money available from illegal liquor could be enormous. Honest officials struggled against both lawbreakers and compromised colleagues. Citizens watched enforcement become uneven and sometimes absurd. One place was raided while another operated openly. One bootlegger was punished while another became powerful. One customer was humiliated while another was protected by influence. The result was not only illegal drinking, it was damage to public trust. A law meant to restore moral order helped teach many Americans that law could be negotiated. That may be one of the most important things the speakeasy left behind, though it is harder to picture than a jazz band or a hidden door. It left behind an argument about the limits of government power over private behaviour. Prohibition had been written into the Constitution, the highest law in the country, and still millions of people found ways around it. That does not mean all laws regulating personal conduct are doomed, and it does not mean the concerns of temperance reformers were foolish. Alcohol abuse had caused real harm. Families had suffered. Reformers were trying to address a genuine social problem. But Prohibition showed that when law moves too far beyond public consent, especially when it tries to control a widespread habit, enforcement can become a national performance that many people stop taking seriously. The speakeasy was the place where that loss of seriousness became visible night after night. The repeal came on December 5, 1933, when the 21st Amendment was ratified and the 18th Amendment was repealed. That sentence sounds clean, but the end of Prohibition was not simply a switch being turned back on. The country that repealed Prohibition was not the same country that had adopted it. The Great Depression had changed the national mood. Governments needed tax revenue. Many people wanted legal jobs restored in breweries, distilleries, trucking, hospitality, and related trades. The argument for repeal was not only that people wanted to drink, it was also that legal alcohol could be taxed, regulated, and brought back into the open. After years of hidden rooms, poisoned liquor, gang profits, and public hypocrisy, legality began to look more practical than moral purity. When legal drinking returned, celebration was real. Breweries reopened where they could. Bars and restaurants applied for licenses. People drank openly again in places where the law allowed it. But the return was controlled. States and localities created their own alcohol rules, and many dry counties and restrictions remained. Repeal did not mean the country abandoned concern about alcohol. It meant the national constitutional experiment had failed. Regulation replaced prohibition as the dominant approach. The hidden door did not vanish everywhere at once, but its central reason for existing had been weakened. A drink no longer needed secrecy in the same way. Still, some habits remained. Nightlife had learned from the underground years. Customers had learned to associate drinking with entertainment, music, dancing, and a certain theatrical sense of escape. Bars and clubs, after repeal, inherited not only customers, but also moods developed during the speakeasy era. The idea of going out for cocktails, of entering a dim room after work, of sitting at a table with mixed company, of drinking as part of an evening built around music and conversation, All of that belonged partly to the world Prohibition had unintentionally strengthened. The old reformers had tried to close the saloon and ended up helping invent a different kind of night. For women, the legacy was complicated. The speakeasy did not grant equality, but it made female drinking in public more visible and more socially possible in certain settings. The image of the modern woman with a cocktail did not disappear after repeal. It became part of advertising, film, literature, and urban life. This visibility did not free women from judgment. It did not make nightlife safe. It did not erase double standards, but it did shift expectations. A woman in a bar or nightclub after Prohibition was entering a world that the 1920s had helped normalise, even if that world still treated her presence as something to be watched, sold, or criticised. For black musicians and performers, the legacy was also mixed. Prohibition-era nightlife helped create jobs and stages, and jazz reached wider audiences in part through clubs that operated within or alongside the illegal economy. But exploitation remained. Segregated venues, unequal pay, racist audiences, and limited control over ownership meant that black creativity often enriched others more than the artists themselves. The speakeasy helped spread the sound of the jazz age, but the conditions under which that sound travelled were shaped by the same inequalities that marked the rest of American life. A trumpet solo could cross boundaries that the performer was not allowed to cross socially. That contradiction should not be softened. The ordinary worker's legacy was less visible but just as real. Waiters, bartenders, drivers, cleaners, musicians, cooks, doormen and suppliers made the underground night function. Most did not become famous. Most did not get remembered. They worked in rooms where the customers made the stories and the staff absorbed the risk. After repeal, some returned to legal hospitality work, some left the trade, some had learned skills and contacts that mattered in the legal bar world. Others had spent years inside an economy that could vanish, shift, or turn dangerous without warning. The speakeasy was built on their labour as much as on the customer's desire. The police legacy lasted too. Prohibition forced American law enforcement to confront questions that would return in other forms throughout the 20th century. How do you enforce a law large numbers of citizens evade? What happens when illegal markets become wealthy enough to corrupt officials? How much surveillance is acceptable in the name of morality? What does selective enforcement do to respect for law? What happens when federal goals depend on local cooperation that may not exist? These questions did not end with repeal. They remained in American politics, attached to other substances, other behaviours, other moral campaigns. The speakeasy is history, but the enforcement problem it exposed is not as distant as it looks. There is also the matter of memory. Americans remember Prohibition in a strangely affectionate way, considering how violent, corrupt, and dangerous parts of it were. We remember the clothes, the music, the slang, the secret doors, the cocktails, the gangsters with nicknames, the women with bobbed hair, the glamour of getting away with something. We remember the comedy of teacups filled with gin and the thrill of a password. We do not remember as easily the poisoned alcohol, the bribed officials, the families still harmed by drinking, the workers arrested, the racial exclusions, the women endangered, the musicians underpaid, the ordinary people caught between a bad law and a real social problem. Nostalgia edits rooms very carefully. It turns down the smell, improves the lighting, hires a better band, and removes the fear from the door. A more honest memory can hold both truths. The speakeasy could be exciting, creative, social, and culturally important. It could also be corrupt, exploitative, dangerous, and built on a law that failed in public while being broken in private. People went there because they wanted pleasure, but they also went because the country had created a situation where pleasure required disguise. That is what gives the speakeasy its lasting power as an image. It is not only a hidden bar, it is a small room where a national contradiction became visible. The United States said one thing in law and did another thing in practice. The Speakeasy put a band in that contradiction and charged admission. Now return one last time to the end of the night. The crowd has thinned. The loudest customers are gone. The band is packing up, tired and ready for daylight. A waiter wipes the last table. The bartender counts what remains and decides which bottles must be hidden before morning. The owner steps near the door and listens to the street. Outside, the city is shifting from night to work. Delivery trucks are beginning to move. Streetcars are carrying early passengers. A milkman may be making his route. Office workers will soon appear with clean collars and serious faces, passing the same doorway without knowing or admitting what happened behind it a few hours earlier. There is something revealing in that overlap. The speakeasy did not exist in some separate fantasy world. It existed beside work, church, family, politics, reform, crime, and ordinary morning routines. The same city that condemned drinking made room for it. The same country that banned alcohol produced the customers who bought it. The same law that promised order helped create hidden disorder. And when dawn came, everyone had to return to the surface and act, more or less, as if the surface was the whole story. Maybe that is why the speakeasy still holds our attention. It reminds us that history is not only made in official places, it is not only made in Congress, courtrooms, elections and speeches. Sometimes it is made in rooms that are not supposed to exist, by people who are not trying to become symbols, over drinks they should not have been able to buy. It is made by the door guard deciding whom to trust, by the bartender stretching a bottle, by the musician playing through smoke, by the woman stepping into public nightlife with a confidence her grandmother would have found alarming, by the policeman choosing whether to enforce the law or profit from it, by the customer lifting a glass and participating in a small, ordinary act of national disobedience. By the time Prohibition ended, the speakeasy had already done its work. It had changed how Americans drank, where they drank, who drank together, how nightlife sounded, how corruption operated, and how seriously millions of people took a law they had learned to evade. The hidden rooms did not defeat Prohibition alone. Economic pressure, political change, public frustration, enforcement failure, and the need for tax revenue all mattered. But the speakeasy made the failure visible. Every glass served after midnight was a quiet vote against the dry nation the law claimed to have created. So when you picture that final door closing before dawn, do not imagine only glamour. Imagine the tiredness too, the wet floor, the smoke in the curtains, the nervous money counted under low light, the bandleader rubbing his eyes, the doorman unlocking the exit for one last customer, the street outside pale and cold, a room that has spent the whole night pretending now returning to its daytime disguise. Somewhere inside there may still be a bottle hidden behind a wall, waiting for the next evening, waiting for another knock, another password, another person willing to step out of the official country and into the one Americans had built behind it. And maybe, the next time you pass an ordinary door on an ordinary street, the kind that gives nothing away, you will think for a moment about all the rooms history has hidden behind plain surfaces. Rooms where people broke rules, made music, earned money, took risks, lied to the law, found pleasure, and left traces that lasted longer than the buildings themselves. The speakeasy was one of those rooms. It was not the whole story of Prohibition, but it was the place where the story breathed, smoked, laughed, worried, and poured another drink just before the morning came.